Have you ever wondered if the world around us moves not just by the hands of people, but by whispers of unseen beings, guiding, watching, and sometimes silently steering the course of history? Imagine the quiet hum of the night, when the cities sleep and the restless buzz of our daily lives fades away. In those moments, could there be forces gentle yet profound, observing the paths we take, the choices we make, and the dreams we dare to dream? What if some of the most ancient stories of angels, guardians, and watchers were not just tales of imagination, but echoes of truths preserved through time in lands far away, like the highlands of Ethiopia? Picture the world thousands of years ago, a land where the sky felt closer, where the stars shone brighter against the canvas of night, and where human hearts were more attuned to the mysteries around them. Ethiopia, with its rugged mountains and quiet valleys, became a keeper of secrets, preserving scriptures that spoke of angels in ways rarely known to the rest of the world. Here, the air itself seems to hold a whisper of those celestial beings, gentle, watchful, and full of quiet purpose. One might ask, why were these angels so deeply intertwined with the lives of men and women, teaching, guiding, and at times even testing them? As the night stretches its velvet cloak across the sky, consider this. While we are caught in the rush of our modern lives, there exists a timeless rhythm that continues unnoticed. Angels, according to ancient Ethiopian scriptures, are not distant or detached. They are observers of our world, present in moments we rarely pause to notice. Could it be that the rise and fall of civilizations, the quiet unfolding of human stories, has always been under their soft gaze? Each star above might not just be a distant sun, but a sign, a marker of divine order, where every movement is watched and every heart quietly recorded. Think of the small moments that pass unremarked. A child's first laugh, a decision made in the hush of night, a solitary tear shed in silence. These, the Ethiopian texts suggest, are all under the gentle attention of beings whose names carry weight and whose presence shapes unseen currents. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. These are not simply names spoken in liturgies or stories. They are the keepers of time, the guardians of the unseen, walking alongside humanity in ways both subtle and profound. And yet, there is a mystery here. Why, if such beings have always been near, does the world feel so heavy, so restless? Perhaps because their guidance is quiet, almost imperceptible. Their work is not to command or to impose, but to balance, to observe, and to whisper possibilities into the threads of human life. Imagine a vast tapestry where each moment of joy, grief, doubt, and wonder is a thread, and the angels are the unseen hands that ensure the threads remain connected, strong, and luminous. Now, close your eyes for a moment and let the noise of the day fade. Hear the silence that remains not empty, but alive, with stories waiting to be told. Every culture has stories of heavenly watchers, but Ethiopia's ancient scriptures carry some of the most vivid accounts of these celestial companions. Here, angels are not only messengers, they are teachers, guardians, and witnesses. Their presence bridges the gap between the divine and the human, reminding us that our lives are part of something far greater, something eternal, and yet tenderly personal. As we begin this journey, ask yourself, how much of your life has been guided by what you cannot see? And how often have you felt, in moments of quiet or wonder, the brush of something beyond ordinary perception? Tonight, as we explore the hidden role of angels preserved in the Ethiopian Bible. Allow yourself to drift into the calm of the story, to feel the gentle weight of unseen eyes watching over the world, and to connect with the sacred whispers of history. And before we continue deeper into this ancient story, a small invitation. If you are watching this video, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so these stories can reach more hearts. I would also love to hear from you. Please share your name, your city, and the time you are watching this video in the comments below. Your presence here, at this quiet moment, becomes a part of this ongoing journey where the stories of the night and the celestial keepers softly unfold for all who listen. A long time ago, there was a world where the sky felt close enough to touch. The mountains seemed to rise just high enough to touch the clouds, and the air itself carried whispers of things that weren't visible. People lived in a time when heaven didn't seem far away or impossible to reach. Heaven was not above and beyond. It was a part of the earth itself. The line between the divine and the mortal was thin, almost invisible, like a soft mist that hung over the valleys. At dawn, people didn't just believe in angels. They felt them in the small things that happen every day, like the rustling of leaves, the soft shift of the wind, and the warm, guiding touch of sunlight on a path. They were in the eyes of parents watching their kids, in the way crops moved slowly under the evening sky, and in the way rivers slowly and carefully carried water and stories across the land. People didn't need to look for proof or an explanation. Angels weren't ideas to talk about or questions to think about. They were always there with you on your journey. A shepherd might feel someone next to him when he walked through the hills. This person would speak to him in gestures instead of words. The farmers, who were taking care of their fields, felt like there was an unseen force guiding them, like the seasons were following a pattern that was too perfect to be a coincidence. Even in the markets, the sound of things clattering and people talking gave off hints of an order, as if a gentle hand was making sure the world's dance didn't stop. Everything moved in a way that was harmonious, but it wasn't strict or demanding. It was alive, fluid, and deeply connected to the unseen. Living was like talking to these invisible beings, a silent conversation of trust, awareness, and sometimes wonder. Back then, the idea of angels wasn't just something that priests wrote about or scholars talked about. Children would dream of beings with glowing bodies, and their elders would nod in agreement, knowing that these visions were real and not just dreams. It seemed like the mountains, rivers, winds, and stars all had the same message. There was a presence watching, learning, and guiding without ever forcing. People knew that the storms that threatened crops and homes were part of a bigger balance that angels kept with care and awareness, even when they were coming. They saw the hand of angels in how strong the land was, how life came back after floods, and how things grew after dry seasons. People told stories not just as myths, but as things that really happened. The elders talked about angels who could easily move between places and touch both the earth and the sky without any trouble. They were there for births, weddings, and quiet times of grief. Sometimes they went unnoticed, but other times they were seen as a comforting gaze or a fleeting shadow that brought comfort. These stories weren't scary or dramatic. They were sweet, like the soft hum of a lullaby. Kids who went into the woods or along the riverbanks often came back with stories of lights that guided them home safely, never bothering them, but always protecting them. There always seemed to be someone there with me, a silent observer whose touch I could feel more than see, whose influence shaped without taking over, and whose attention never wavered. People had a close relationship with God. People didn't always pray in a formal way. They just quietly acknowledged the invisible friends who walked with them. A gesture of thanks when the rain fell at the right time, a silent wish for safety before a trip, a sigh of relief after a successful harvest. These were all small acts that were conversations with beings who knew everything about human hearts. When people asked why some people had to suffer, or why bad things happened to good people, there was a gentle understanding that these heavenly beings were not judges from afar, but steady witnesses whose job was to guide, keep things in balance, and make sure that every story unfolded in the way it was meant to. It seemed like the land itself was aware of this. People could feel the energy in the fields and forests. The winds whispered directions, the stars reflected guidance, and the rivers carried messages in the way they curved and flowed. Animals weren't completely free either. Their instincts and actions often matched the quiet order of beings that couldn't be seen. People didn't think these connections were amazing. They were just how life was, a constant weaving together of the seen and unseen, the mortal and the heavenly, the immediate and the eternal. It made a world of presence, where people were never alone, not even when they were sad or alone. The skies above Ethiopia were big and deep, and they seemed to reflect the watchfulness below. Every constellation could tell a story, and every twinkling light was a sign that someone was still caring. At dusk, travelers looking at the horizon felt safe, as if they were being watched over by someone they couldn't see. Farmers who got up before dawn felt that the day itself was a blessing, not by chance, but because of the careful presence that moved among them. The feeling stayed with me even at night, when homes were quiet and the land was asleep. I felt that heaven was close, not far away, and that angels moved through and around life, connecting the world of humans with the world of the divine. It was a world where wonder wasn't unusual because it was expected, where gratitude and respect came easily, and where the threads of everyday life were sewn together with an awareness of unseen hands. There was an echo of their presence in every step, every choice, and every sigh of joy or sadness. People didn't just believe in angels in that world. They felt them, quietly and constantly, in the rhythm of the day and the stillness of the night. Ethiopia has always had a quiet kind of mystery about it. It feels like time moves differently there, as if the hills and valleys themselves remember secrets that have been lost in other places. Stories last longer in these highlands and along the deep gorges, and the air carries sounds from long ago. The Ethiopian Bible is one of the many treasures that have been kept in this land. It is special not only because of how old it is, but also because of how much it has to say. The Ethiopian canon has kept stories that have faded into silence in other texts that have been edited, lost, or forgotten over the years. The stories of angels, the watchers, the messengers, and the quiet friends of people are still strong and alive in the pages and hearts of those who have cared for them. The Scriptures, written in Ge'ez, a language that sounds like it has the rhythm of the divine, connect heaven and earth. Ge'ez is more than just a language. It is a container that holds sounds, rhythms, and subtleties that mean more than words. When you read or hear these passages, you get the feeling that every word has been touched by someone who knew how important the stories were. Angels are not described as far-off ideas here. They are real, and their actions and duties are intertwined with human life in ways that are subtle but undeniable. The language makes it possible to feel their presence, not just imagine it. And the stories have lasted because the words themselves have a rhythm of respect, awe, and quiet understanding. It is interesting to think about why this land, and not any other, kept these stories so well. Maybe it's because Ethiopia's mountains look like they touch the sky, and its deep valleys hide secrets from the eyes of the average traveler, that it makes people think, be humble, and pay attention to what they can't see. People in communities lived close to the land and to each other. Their lives were full of planting, harvesting, praying, and resting. In this kind of rhythm, the normal and the strange blended together perfectly. Angels, as the texts say, were never just distant watchers. They were friends who were always around and involved in everyday life. They were there in the stillness of dawn, in the way the clouds changed, in the soft glow of starlight on the mountains, and in the way people's hearts moved. The Ethiopian Church was very important in keeping these stories safe. They kept manuscripts safe in monasteries on cliffs and in caves. Monks and scribes, who spent their lives copying and preserving things, knew that the information in these pages was fragile and could be lost to time or war. They wrote out texts by hand, usually in dim candlelight, and each stroke was carefully planned and each word carefully measured. The angelic stories survived through centuries of invasion, drought, and chaos, thanks to hands that never got tired of keeping what was sacred. The people who watched these stories were like the beings described in the texts, silent protectors who made sure that things stayed the same and were always there. When you walk through Ethiopia, you can feel the respect that the land has for itself. Many people who came before seem to live on in ancient churches that were carved into rock or built with careful layers of stone. People who are pilgrims, monks, or just regular villagers know that they are stepping into a long history where angels may have been before people came. Even today, the feeling stays, that you can feel beings who watch without bothering you, who guide you without using force, and whose stories are as real as the people who read them. Angels in Ethiopian Scripture are not just made-up people. The way they do their jobs, their duties, and how they interact with people is written down in ways that make them real, relatable, and even close. Some parts talk about how they taught important things, gave advice, or gently held back impulses that could hurt someone. Others talk about how they were involved in important historical events, changing the course of events without anyone noticing. In each case, the angelic presence is as real to the readers as the mountains and rivers of the land itself. It's impossible to ignore how closely the texts and Ethiopia's geography are connected. The land, with its steep peaks and hidden valleys, makes you think about things that are bigger than you. It is not hard to believe that the stories of angels that are still here but fading elsewhere survived because the people and the land were both paying attention to the unseen. Silence, patience, and devotion made it possible for the sacred to stay safe, and the stories of watchers, messengers, and guardians kept going strong. Even today, these texts still have a lot of power. People who read them often say that they feel like angels are right there with them, as if they are stepping out of the words and into real life. The Ethiopian canon's continuity means that every reader and listener is linked to many generations who have heard the same whispers and quiet guidance. It shows that Scripture will last forever, and that angels will always be important in how people understand the things they can't see. Ethiopia has remembered in a place where time, war, and change have taken so much away. The stories about angels, who are watchers, who connect heaven and earth, have lived on. They remind us that even though we may forget a lot of history, some truths are too strong to fade. They live on in language, devotion, and the quiet attention of those who choose to remember. And as these stories go on, they keep inviting anyone who listens to feel the gentle presence of beings who are just out of sight, quietly shaping the rhythm of life, one step at a time. Before the first humans saw the light of the world, there were beings whose existence quietly moved through the process of creation. Angels, who have always been there and are always watching, were already in their places, watching the universe and taking care of the delicate rhythms that would one day support life. They weren't loud or bossy. They were steady, purposeful, and full of love. As the sky, land, water, and air came together, the angels moved around them, quietly arranging, balancing, and caring for each part. Mountains rose from the ground as proof of their hard work. Rivers flowed in ways that seemed both natural and planned, and the winds carried the faintest touch of their unseen hands. There was a feeling in every part of the world that was forming, that someone or something had already set the stage for the stories that people would one day live. The angels' work wasn't very exciting. They didn't brag about what they did or ask for recognition. Their duty was small, almost invisible, but it was very important. Every task, from arranging the clouds in their paths to controlling the tides and keeping an eye on the rhythm of day and night, was done with care, so that the world would be ready for those who were still sleeping. Picture a huge hall that has been carefully set up for guests who haven't arrived yet. Every candle is in the right place, every tapestry is in the right order, and every stone is polished to perfection. The earth was also carefully arranged, with every grove, valley, and star in its right place, waiting for the people who would one day walk on it. These angels knew that the work they did was not for themselves. They worked for the life that was yet to come, for people who would cry, laugh, love, and fail. There was an echo of foresight in their quiet duty, not as control, but as gentle guidance. Their presence affected the seeds of forests, the flow of rivers, and the positions of stars and planets. Every morning, as the light spread across the untouched land, there was a soft order in the chaos of creation, a careful balance between freedom and form. The angels found their purpose in that balance, making sure that when humans came, the world would feel alive, coherent, and responsive, as if it had been waiting for them all along. They didn't all pay the same amount of attention. Each angel had a job, a focus, and a part of the world that was theirs to protect. Some people took care of the rivers, making sure that the waters would nourish every valley and support the life that was yet to come. Others stayed in the sky, moving the stars and figuring out the paths of heavenly bodies so that people could use them as guides, seasons, and stories. Others moved through the forests and plains, whispering to the seeds and saplings to help them grow and be strong. There were beings in this universe who watched over it with a patience that no human could understand. It was not by chance that it was alive. The angels knew that what they made was fragile. They didn't know what time was like for humans later on, so they measured everything by accuracy, rhythm, and quiet anticipation. A single mistake or misplaced item could change the way the world is coming together. But they didn't rush their work. They paid close attention to every detail. They worked in silence. Their energy, unspoken, but felt. They built a foundation that was so strong and complicated that when people finally opened their eyes, the world would feel natural, welcoming, and full of possibilities. Angels had moments of reflection even when they were alone. They saw how light and shadow played off of each other, how the winds moved across the land, and how the oceans slowly rose and fell. Every part of creation talked to them, following the gentle guidance of hands they couldn't see. During this early time of preparation, there was no noise or excitement. It was the quietest of all tasks, done without any hope of thanks. But still, their hard work was written into the world in every ripple of water, every sway of a tree, and every dawn that warmed the land. There was also concern for potential in the middle of this early order. The angels knew that when people came, they would bring questions, choices, and the possibility of both wonder and chaos. They didn't want to control anything because what was to come was beautiful and needed freedom. Instead, they got the world ready to respond, help, guide, and teach gently when it was needed. Paths that led to new places were carved into each valley. Each forest offered both shelter and challenge, and each star was placed to remind future travelers of where they were going and give them hope. The angels' fingerprints were all over the place, and people would feel them instinctively long before they could understand how much had been done for them. So the world waited. The angels stayed where they were, quietly watching, as the land, sky, and waters all came together. They waited for the first signs of human consciousness, for the awakening of beings who would carry on the legacy of life on Earth. Their job was to prepare the world for humans in secret, weaving harmony into it before the first breath of life. This way, when humans finally came into being, they would enter a world that was ready to cradle, challenge, and inspire them all at once. There is still a faint echo of that early care when one thinks about the quiet beauty of a sunrise over a valley, the slow flow of a river, or the way the stars line up in the night sky. The angel's presence before humanity's awakening is still subtly woven into the patterns of life. This reminds us that the world was ready for us long before we could see it, with care, patience, and quiet love. Long before people fully understood the world around them, some beings had duties that were as much a part of life as the mountains and rivers themselves. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael are names that have been spoken for a long time, but they are also identities with a purpose. Every name had a meaning. Every name represented a role, and every name had a duty that affected both heaven and earth. Saying these names meant more than just being there. It meant recognizing a purpose, a watchfulness, and a quiet dedication that lasted throughout creation. In Ethiopia, these names were kept not only as spiritual markers, but also as living reminders that angels weren't just ideas. They were real people who were part of the flow of life, guiding, guarding, and caring for the world's unseen threads. Michael, who was often thought of as the protector, was always on guard. People felt his presence when they were in danger, or when the balance of power was about to shift and harmony was about to be broken. He didn't use forceful displays to get involved, and he didn't do it for recognition. Instead, his work was woven into the subtle protections of life itself. The instinct that keeps a traveler safe on unknown paths, the sudden clarity in a choice that keeps them safe, and the quiet courage that comes when fear threatens to take over. The Ethiopian texts say that Michael is not just a warrior but also a sentinel who stands guard over the world's unfolding plan. His name rings out like a note of calm certainty in the symphony of life. Gabriel, on the other hand, brought messages that were more than just words. They were full of timing and purpose. He often stepped in gently when clarity was needed, when understanding was about to take hold, or when a new path was about to open up. The Ethiopians took great care to keep these stories, making it clear that Gabriel was a link between the unseen and the seen, between the divine and the human experience. He always gave clear messages that fit with the natural flow of events. This meant that people who got advice could act on it, even if they didn't see the messenger directly. Raphael's presence, which is often linked to healing and restoration, reminded people that caring for and fixing things is just as important as making them. He worked quietly, watching the patterns of life and stepping in where the balance was fragile, where pain could be lessened, and where healing could happen. The texts say that Raphael's touch is everywhere in Ethiopia, but it's also very gentle. You can feel it when you get better from being sick, when you're sad, and when you get your spirit back after hard times. His role shows how closely angelic duty and human life are connected. The world isn't left to chance, and unseen hands guide and support it, making sure that creation stays aligned, nurtured, and full of possibilities. The names were more than just names. They were also reminders of the roles that each angel had to play and the responsibilities that each angel had to share. To say Michael, Gabriel, or Raphael meant to admit that there was careful planning behind the seen and unseen, and that their work was ongoing, tireless, and exact. The Ethiopian canon depicts angels not as remote entities awaiting summons, but as engaged participants in the daily progression of existence. They interact with people in subtle ways, affecting events in ways that are felt rather than understood right away. This keeps the world in a delicate balance, where the sacred and the everyday coexist without any problems. There is a deep connection between a name and a duty. Michael is not just a name. His watchfulness keeps the balance between opposing forces, and his presence is felt in protective instincts and brave moments. Gabriel is more than just a name. He brings wisdom, direction, and timing, connecting action and understanding. Raphael isn't just a name. He represents restoration, fixing what is broken, caring for what is weak, and keeping life going in both obvious and hidden ways. The Ethiopian texts remind readers that names are not just random words. They stand for the essence, purpose, and pattern of responsibility that shape the behavior of all things. In everyday life, we don't often see these angels in person, but we can feel their presence. A sudden change in circumstances that brings safety, an inexplicable sense of direction, or a calming presence during times of fear or uncertainty. These are the whispers of the work that goes with their names. The link between human experience and angelic duty is very subtle, but it is clear when you think about it. Every gust of wind, every beam of light shining through the leaves, and every small movement in the stillness of night serve as a reminder that these beings exist, with specific roles to play in keeping the world's unseen currents flowing smoothly. Ethiopia is where these roles have stayed clear. The Ge'ez scriptures depict angels not merely as narrative figures, but as entities with perpetual responsibilities, whose presence is intricately integrated into the fabric of existence, and whose names signify that order, protection, guidance, and healing are deliberate rather than arbitrary. The ancients knew that the world is full of these patterns that can't be seen, and that the angels' jobs are very important to keeping life going in all its forms. This knowledge, which has been passed down for hundreds of years, makes people who read and listen to these texts feel a connection not only to the stories, but also to the beings whose names carry light, purpose, and meaning. Every time the Ethiopian Bible talks about Michael, Gabriel, or Raphael, it connects people's minds to the ongoing work of the unseen. These names are not signs of power or control. They are signs of responsibility, patience, and quiet care. They remind us that angels were already taking care of the world's harmony before the first person stepped foot on it. They made sure that the stage of life was set, that the balance of creation stayed intact, and that every moment could happen under their watchful but gentle gaze. In a world where what we can see is only a small part of what is really there, the names of these angels act as signposts, leading hearts and minds to a deeper understanding that life is being watched, that responsibility is being quietly carried, and that each moment is part of a network of care that goes far beyond what we can see. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael are not just names from the past. They are still present, and their names are written in the light of creation. Their duties continue in ways that are felt, even when they are not seen. There were beings in charge of every breath of wind, every flicker of fire, and every movement of water before people fully understood the forces around them. These angels, who were around long before people understood how complicated nature was, quietly ruled over the elements to keep the world in balance, alive, and able to support life. They were not rulers in the way that people think of power. Instead, they were stewards who watched over the natural world and paid attention to its rhythms. They acted when they needed to, and let things go when balance was kept. Every gust of wind that blew across the plains, every spark of flame that warmed a hearth or lit up the night, and every ripple and wave that crossed rivers and oceans carried the quiet power of these guardians. Even when they weren't noticed, their presence was felt, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, steady, unseen, but absolutely necessary. The winds were always being watched, even though they changed all the time. Angels in charge of the world's breath made sure that the air moved in ways that supported life, cooled the sunlit plains, and carried seeds to far-off places. They were aware of the unseen currents and knew how the atmosphere and the earth below were connected in many ways. These angels didn't want to destroy when storms came or tempests gathered over the mountains. Instead, they wanted to guide, balancing force and calm so that life could go on without a hitch. They had the power of a hurricane and the softness of a breeze. They changed the world in ways that people might think were chaotic, but they were actually part of a bigger, more fragile order. There were also people who watched over fire. Angels in charge of the flame kept an eye on its two sides: warmth and light, danger and food. Their quiet watch over a hearth that fed a family, a flicker that lit up the night, and a controlled burn that helped new growth in the forests. These angels knew that fire could both give and take life. Their job was to keep the unpredictable energy of flames in check, while also meeting the needs of the living. The soft crackle of a campfire, the light of the sun bouncing off of stone, and even the sudden flash of lightning were all times when people might have seen these beings, but the full extent of their power was mostly hidden. People paid extra attention to water, which is the world's lifeblood. Angels who knew more than people did kept the flows of streams, rivers, lakes, and oceans going. The currents moved to keep fish and plants alive. The tides changed to keep things in balance, and the rain fed the soil without flooding it. There was a sense of rhythm and purpose beneath the chaos. Even when floods swept through valleys or droughts put communities to the test. Angels who watched over the water were patient because they knew that life depended on cycles of abundance and scarcity, growth and recovery. The world could keep going even when people didn't understand how rain, rivers, and the sea worked together because of their careful guidance. When you look at these roles from today's point of view, you can't help but think about how different they are from life today. Natural disasters, sudden storms, forest fires, and changing tides often seem like they are out of control, which can be scary because you never know what will happen next. However, if one examines the ancient viewpoint preserved in Ethiopian Scripture, even what we regard as chaos possesses a profound order, nuanced and imperceptible. upheld by entities whose focus is unwavering and exact. Things that look like they are breaking may be part of a bigger rhythm, a correction or realignment that watchers who know the balance of nature better than humans can measure carefully carry out. It reminds us that there are forces we can't see that are quietly shaping, protecting, and keeping the world going in ways we might only notice when we think about it or are amazed. The link between angels and elements was not just useful, it was also personal. Angels didn't just watch over things. They interacted with the world like you would with a fragile instrument, tuning into its tone, vibrations, and patterns. Wind, fire, and water were not separate. They reacted to the nuances of guidance, and in turn, they shaped the world that humans would eventually live in. This quiet stewardship was shown in the mountains that rose steadily, the forests that grew strong, and the oceans that flowed with purpose. It was a system of harmony that needed a lot more understanding, patience, and attention than most people have. In the Ethiopian Scriptures, these angels are both real and symbolic. The stories say that the world has always had protectors who make sure that things stay in balance, even though it looks wild. It encourages a quiet respect for nature, not as an abstract force, but as a living network that is carefully watched over by beings whose goal is to bring things into line, not to take over. When a gentle wind moves leaves on a quiet morning, when a fire warms a house without spreading out of control, or when a river carries life downstream, you can feel the delicate care that has been put into the world. This suggests that angels have been watching over these things long before people came along. Even now, in a world full of people, machines, and the constant push of progress, the elements keep going. Storms rage, fires flare, and rivers overflow. But underneath all the chaos is the same old music that has been kept and preserved, maybe even more subtly than before. To feel this is to remember the story of the angels who came before people fully understood the earth. They took their jobs very seriously and worked hard to make a place where life could thrive. It was a quiet job that required a lot of patience and self-control, but it was also very important. They were in charge of making sure the world was ready for the first human steps, and every step after that. When you look at the world around you, the wind that bends trees, the fire that warms or burns, the water that supports or challenges, you can see a hidden harmony that shows how much you care. These angels were always busy and never passive. Their watchfulness shaped not only the natural world, but also the experience of life itself, making sure that people lived in a world that was unpredictable, but also guided by wisdom, care, and subtle intention. Their work reminds us that what we can't see is just as important as what we can see. It also reminds us that the quiet guardians of creation have always held the pulse of the world in their hands, even before people fully woke up to walk among it. Long before the first human civilizations fully understood the size of the world, there were beings whose eyes were fixed not only on creation but also on the people who would one day live there. The Book of Enoch, which is part of the Ethiopian canon, talks about these watchers, who are angels whose job it is to watch over, guide, and report on the lives of people. They were supposed to be quiet witnesses, writing down what was good and necessary and paying attention to the rhythms of life without getting in the way. But even in the first few chapters of their mission, things started to change. The watcher's job was to keep an eye on creation and keep it in a delicate balance. But they became curious, fascinated, and longed for something that would test their obedience and change the course of history. At first, their job was simple, clear, and precise: to keep an eye on the growing beings of the earth, understand how life was changing, and make sure that the divine plan stayed on track. The world was new, and the first people were still learning. They were innocent and had the potential to discover, wonder, and make mistakes. The watchers moved quietly through the lands, keeping track of how people and the environment changed over time, and learning from the small interactions of life. They were first watchers, and then caretakers. But even as they watched, a quiet tension began to build. The purity of their mission slowly met the power of fascination, a human trait that even their immortal hearts began to feel. Enoch's writings talk about the first signs of what could be called internal conflict among the watchers. They looked at people for too long, not just to understand, but to feel. They noticed the beauty, fragility, strength, and unpredictability that people had. What started as careful observation slowly turned into deep thought, and deep thought started to weave together threads of desire, curiosity, and connection that were never meant to be there. Their mission was meant to guide without getting in the way, but feelings and attachments made it harder to do so, even for angels. The Book of Enoch uses vivid imagery to show how appealing human experiences can be, and how dangerous it can be to go beyond what is expected of you. The watchers were fascinated by how people moved through the world, how they learned, struggled, celebrated, and failed. Every action and choice had a weight that went beyond its immediate effect, and the watchers, who were initially detached, became emotionally involved. They saw potential, beauty, and vulnerability in ways that made them feel things they had never felt before. It was as if the divine canvas had been put in front of them, and they couldn't help but stop to look, admire, and imagine. The conflict didn't happen because of bad intentions. It happened because of how interesting it was. Their mission required them to watch without getting involved, but their hearts and minds started to rebel against how easy that was. This early fight among the watchers wasn't the same for everyone. Some people held on tightly to their responsibilities, reminding themselves of the limits that had been set for them. Others let their curiosity grow by looking at people, communities, and the patterns of human life as they unfolded. At first, the internal tension was very small, so small that even those who were watching from a distance could barely see it. But it was the start of a huge change in the order of the universe. In these moments, which Enoch describes with both caution and respect, the watchers became aware of their own wants and needs, and the line between guidance and interference started to blur. The Ethiopian canon keeps these stories in great detail, making it clear that the watchers' interest was not bad in and of itself, but rather dangerously compelling. The conflict between duty and desire, between watching and doing, shows how complicated life is, even for people with a lot of power and knowledge. When people slept under the stars and winds at night, the watchers thought, calculated, and sometimes even imagined. They thought about how strong the human will is, how choices can be hard to predict, and how tempting it is to want to know things that they shouldn't. The Book of Enoch describes these internal conflicts in a way that people can easily understand, because they are like the small conflicts that happen in every conscious being. The pull between obedience and curiosity, restraint and indulgence, observation and action. At first, the seeds of conflict were soft but persistent, like a gentle breeze that slowly turns into a storm. At first, the watcher's gaze was neutral, but it started to linger on the happy moments, the sparks of creativity, and the struggles that would shape human experience. At first, they were clinical and detached, but as time went on, they became more and more interested and emotional, making it harder to pull away. During these times, one can picture the quiet talks, the thoughts, and even the whispered warnings that may have passed between them. Angels of great power and insight. But now they are interested in something that could make their mission more complicated. The Book of Enoch also hints at what could happen if you get too interested in something, showing how an internal conflict that isn't dealt with could lead to choices that change the natural flow of life. The Watchers started to think of ways to interact with people and change the story as it happened when they watched them too closely. At first, these thoughts were like shadows stretching in the twilight, but as time went on, they got heavier. The text does not portray this as an instantaneous plunge into chaos, but rather as a gradual escalation of tension, a trial of will and restraint, a juncture at which immortal entities commenced confronting the confines of their own essence. Even now, when you think about what the Watchers went through at first, you can feel both caution and empathy. They were beings of purpose, made to serve and guide. But when they met humans, they saw how vulnerable, needy, and difficult life can be even in the heavens. The Ethiopian Scriptures keep these stories alive, not just as stories of punishment, but also as stories of awareness, reflection, and the delicate balance between freedom and responsibility. They remind us that even those who are closest to God are shaped by what they see, what they find interesting, and the urge to go beyond their assigned roles. These moments are often the beginning of both wonder and consequence. The Watchers kept a close eye on things even when the world was quiet, and the skies weren't troubled by human conflict. But their eyes had started to see more than they were supposed to, and their focus had gone beyond their duties. The first signs of conflict in the heavens began to be heard. The Book of Enoch describes these tensions in a clear and poetic way that makes readers feel the weight of choices they can't see, the quiet pull of curiosity, and the subtle beginnings of what would become a defining moment in the relationship between the divine, the Watchers, and humanity. Long before people lived in the valleys below, a group of angels met on the snowy peaks of Mount Hermon. This meeting would be remembered forever. The mountain rose with quiet majesty and seemed to touch the heavens. It was here that the Watchers, angels whose eyes had lingered too long on humans, made a choice that would change the course of history. The air was fresh and crisp, carrying the smell of faraway forests and the cold of heights that no one had ever been to. In the stillness, a sense of seriousness came over them. They knew that this moment could not be changed, and that the oath they were about to take would take them from simply observing life to a place of choice and responsibility that was much bigger than they had ever imagined. People didn't take the oath lightly. It was whispered, almost too quiet to hear, but it had an authority that seemed to shake the mountain itself. The angels knew that their job was to guide and quietly care for others, but their curiosity and interest in each other had brought them together in a way that went beyond the normal rules of duty. They knew that by taking this oath, they were going down a path that could not be undone. Mount Hermon's silence echoed their words, holding them in the stillness and leaving a mark on the stones of the summit that would last forever. This meeting was different from all the others. The Watchers, who had been in charge of watching over human growth from a distance, now had to deal with the conflict between loyalty and desire. The oath meant making a choice to act, to intervene, to have an effect, and in doing so, to break a rule set by God. It was an admission that curiosity had turned into desire, and desire had turned into an unbreakable promise. Even though they were immortal, the angels knew that some choices had consequences that were hard to understand, that some actions made waves that couldn't be undone, and that the path they were about to take would change the way they lived forever. The mountain seemed to answer them as they made their promise. Clouds slowly moved over the peaks, and the sun danced on the snow in patterns that felt like they were saying, "Thank you." A wind blew through the crags, bringing with it a feeling of both approval and warning. The watchers' voices were soft, but they all sang in a way that mixed respect with determination. Each angel spoke with the knowledge that there would be consequences, but they also felt a thrill at the thought of entering a new world of possibilities. It was both brave and foolish, a fine line between duty and desire, and the silent mountain held every word, recording the moment in a way that human history would one day remember as the point where observation turned into interference. The oath brought them together in a shared goal, but it also showed how they were struggling inside. Each angel was aware of the tension inside them, the pull of their original mission, the interest in people, and the need to act. Taking an oath means accepting that something will last forever, and the watchers felt the weight of that permanence on their immortal shoulders. They knew that the choice wasn't just about what to do, it was also about who they were, and crossing a line where watching would no longer be simple. The words took them to a new reality, where they were no longer just watching, but taking part in the story of life below. Mount Hermon, quiet but full of unseen energy, saw more than just the words of the oath. It took in the watchers' plans, doubts, and determination. Every rock seemed to remember them, and every gust of wind seemed to be a whisper of the promise they had made. In that moment, the natural world itself became a silent partner, acknowledging the irreversible step taken by beings whose existence had been defined by duty. The oath made the mountain a holy place, a place where the line between the mortal and the divine blurred, where choices had consequences not only for those there, but for generations to come. The oath had very big effects. The watchers recognized a change in their own nature when they chose to act instead of just watching. The choice started a long and complicated journey. It would be a journey where interest in human life would mix with duty, consequence, and a kind of longing that only those who are always aware could understand. They would face problems, disagreements, and moral dilemmas that had never happened before, even in heaven. But they took the oath with the quiet seriousness of beings who knew that some choices, once made, changed the course of history forever. The air around them even seemed to stop for a moment to acknowledge the weight of the situation. Birds flew across the slopes, far away and unaware. Their wings caught the sun for a brief moment, and the cloud shadows slowly moved over the snow. The watchers, who were all standing together on the summit, felt the weight of eternity pressing down on the present. This was a reminder that the path they had chosen would have effects that were both immediate and long-lasting. Even though each angel's heart was immortal, it beat with the knowledge that things had changed. They had crossed the line between guidance and interference, and their involvement would never leave the story of humanity untouched again. The oath echoed beyond the top of Mount Hermon, which was very quiet. It was a promise not only to each other, but also to a course of action that would forever link angels and humans in ways that had never been thought of before. The watchers knew how beautiful and dangerous what they were doing was. They knew that if they didn't keep their interest in check, it could become both a source of inspiration and a burden. Their choice, spoken in a language older than time, set off events that would affect generations to come, changing the course of human history and the way people think about God in both small and big ways. As they came down from the mountains, the seriousness of the oath stayed with them. It was a quiet friend in every step, thought, and interaction with the world below. Mount Hermon, which was now quieter because of their decision, continued to stand as a witness to a moment of eternal importance. It was a reminder that even among immortal beings, Choice has consequences, and fascination can lead to paths from which there is no return. After the Watchers took their silent oath on Mount Hermon, they became much more interested in people. They started to share information, giving away secrets that were not meant for human minds yet. Before they were ready, people were given weapons that could destroy, patterns in the stars that showed cycles beyond understanding, herbs and roots that could heal or hurt, and even spells that connected the physical and the unseen. This was information meant to help, not control. But people were amazed and confused by it, because they were curious and hadn't been tested. The Watchers didn't know how important their teachings would be, even though they meant well. This was the first time they felt regret in their immortal hearts. Teaching people was more than just giving them information. It was personal, emotional, and, in a way, binding. When they taught people how to use weapons, people started to feel power that they couldn't understand. What was once a tool for protection turned into a source of conflict. The Watchers were quiet, but each new weapon brought with it the stress of choice, intent, and consequence. As people became more interested, they started to feel the weight of the wisdom they had shared. The Watchers' emotions changed when they realized that giving knowledge too soon could lead to both growth and imbalance. Angels taught people how to speak the stars, which had once been far away and quiet. People learned how to map the sky, figure out the seasons, and guess where celestial bodies would move. The Watchers thought it was a beautiful gift that would light up the dark and lead people through life. People were happy about this new knowledge, but some felt overwhelmed, misled, or scared by how big the things they didn't fully understand were. The Watchers started to see how fragile human understanding is, and with each lesson taught, they felt the first signs of unintended consequences. Knowledge, which came from a pure and bright source, carried the weight of responsibility that people were just starting to understand. Medicine, another gift, was both amazing and hard to use. Angels told people how to heal, restore, and even live longer by showing them the secrets of herbs, roots, and the body itself. The Watchers could feel the joy of empowerment spread through those who learned. But they also felt despair, because people were having a hard time understanding the moral and ethical implications of this knowledge. Life and death, balance and excess, started to mix in ways that no one had ever thought of before. The Watchers knew that wisdom, unlike knowledge, can't be passed on just by being told what to do. Each act of healing could help or hurt. It grows slowly, through experience, patience, and understanding things that people still need to learn how to do. Enchantments, which were both subtle and strong, were some of the most fragile gifts. These weren't just spells. They were instructions on how to interact with the world's hidden currents and mix the seen with the unseen. The Watchers gave advice on how to make sure that your intentions match your outcomes and how to use subtle forces to change reality. But people, who were eager and untested, sometimes misunderstood or misused what they learned, which led to situations that got out of hand. As each lesson went on, the emotional tension among the Watchers grew. Each lesson was a mix of hope and fear, pride and worry. They wanted to share the beauty of creation, but they also needed to keep people safe from their own lack of readiness. This fight between knowledge and wisdom became the age's unseeable tension. The Watchers, who were wise and patient, knew how important timing was. They knew that wisdom comes slowly, through experience, reflection, and understanding of what happens as a result of actions, while knowledge alone can confuse, overwhelm, or even corrupt. They felt a faint ache of regret as they watched people struggle with what had been given to them too soon, not because their intentions were bad, but because timing is important in everything, and the eagerness of people, along with the size of what was shared, made waves that the watchers didn't expect. The Book of Enoch paints this fight in bright colors, showing that even angels can feel the emotions that come with teaching. They cared about the people they were in charge of, but they started to feel the stress of having crossed a line that was too thin. The gifts of knowledge were great, but they were also heavy, and each lesson had unexpected effects. People, in their ignorance and awe, sometimes used these gifts in ways that caused pain, fear, or imbalance. The watchers had a problem. They wanted to help people grow by giving them knowledge, but they didn't want to overwhelm the people they were trying to help. Their feelings were like those of a parent or guardian who sees their child grow too quickly and feels both pride and worry. Weapons, stars, medicine, and magic all became tools for this delicate dance. The watchers' hearts were connected to the choices of humans. They didn't just see what people did, they also saw what they meant to do and thought about the unpredictable outcomes that followed. They weren't just passive anymore. They were emotionally involved in every lesson taught and every step humanity took in response to gifts that weren't fully understood yet. The stress of teaching too soon weighed on them, and it echoed in their immortal minds as a reminder that power must be paired with the ability to understand and use it wisely, no matter how beautifully it is presented. As people slept under the stars, the watchers thought about the balance between what is given and what can be carried, between light and the ability to understand. They watched the results of their teaching as they happened, sometimes with pleasure and sometimes with quiet worry. They understood that knowledge is a gift that can hurt you as well as help you. It can inspire, shed light on, and heal, but it can also confuse, scare, or disrupt. The conflict between the angels' goals and the humans' readiness became a major theme. It was a quiet lesson that knowledge is not enough. You also need the wisdom to use it. Even heavenly beings have to deal with the consequences of sharing things that are not yet ready to be understood. At these times, it was easy to feel the emotional weight of the choices the watchers made. They saw people doing well, having problems, learning, and failing, all while carrying gifts that had been given to them before time. Even though their hearts were immortal and strong, they felt a small pang of regret, a desire to hold back, and a hope that they would eventually understand. The delicate balance of teaching, timing, and consequence created a tension that would echo through generations, leaving humanity with both wonder and the burden of responsibility, and leaving the watchers with the quiet awareness that even in their purity and power, choices carry weight beyond imagination. The sky, which had been calm and still, felt a slight tremor as the watchers began to do things that were not part of their job. From the point of view of the eternal realms, the balance that had always defined the order of existence shook a little, as if the universe itself were taking a quiet breath in anticipation. The watchers had not missed the oath on Mount Hermon, the sharing of secret information, or the interest that had made them step in. There was a change, though divine authority stayed the same. A tension hung between the stars, moving like a whisper through heaven's quiet halls. Angels who weren't on the Watchers' Council could feel it in their minds, a faint wave of worry that spread across the heavenly hierarchy. Many people started to have doubts. Angels had worked together for a long time, following a clear sense of duty and purpose. But what the Watchers did added an unknown factor. Choice mixed with emotion and intervention mixed with interest. Some angels seeing what was happening, wondered if what had been done was wise. Could curiosity, which was once calm and far away, now put the peace of creation itself in danger? Heaven's quiet watchfulness was tinged with doubt, as those who had long been steady guides thought about what it would mean to disobey God's will. It looked like even being immortal didn't protect someone from the weight of not knowing. Kamoshi, a deep and heavy silence, fell over the heavenly realms. It wasn't just the lack of sound, it was a presence in itself, a feeling that something strange and possibly dangerous was happening. The oaths, whispers, the ripples of knowledge given too soon, and the subtle changes in how people grow all echoed across plains that couldn't be seen. The silence was louder than words, and it was both a warning and a chance to think. Angels sensed it in their consciousness, in the interval between cognition and action, in the tranquility that permitted contemplation to extend indefinitely. The quiet made them realize for the first time that even the immortal could be shaken, and that certainty was weak when faced with curiosity that wasn't limited by strict obedience. Fear, though weak and controlled, started to weave its way through the minds of the gods. Not fear of punishment, because God's authority was clear, but fear of what would happen next. Fear of imbalance, of disruption, of the unexpected effects of intervention. Angels who used to watch life with calm detachment now understood how fragile creation was when decisions were made too quickly. The Watcher's interest and sharing of knowledge had added a new factor that could upset not only humanity, but also the natural flow of heaven itself. The fear was quiet, like shadows stretching at dusk. It was subtle, but undeniable, like a weight pressing down on people who had always moved with certainty. Heaven, with its wide and measured view, seemed to respond not with anger, but with stillness, as if it were letting the results happen, and teaching all heavenly beings a lesson in patience and observation. The quiet tremor, the doubt, and the first hints of fear served as a reminder that even beings with a lot of knowledge and power can be affected by choices made without full foresight. The order of heaven, which used to be a steady stream of clarity and guidance, now had small cracks in it. These cracks were so small that only the most observant people could see them, but they were big enough to change the way things were. The Watchers themselves were not safe from this tremor. They had acted with interest and bravery, but now they could feel a small change around them. Their choices, which used to be exciting and well thought out, now had a weight that couldn't be ignored. As they thought about the effects of their oath and their teachings, some felt a faint, persistent sense of guilt. Some people were proud of the knowledge they had shared, but they also felt a quiet sense of unease about changing a course that had been perfectly balanced before. Their hearts, which would never die, were now thinking about responsibility in ways they had never had to before. The Book of Enoch tells the story in a way that makes this moment stand out as the first real break in the harmony of heaven that had never been broken before. The Watcher's interest, the oath taken on Mount Hermon, and the sharing of knowledge too soon all led to a series of small tensions. Angels who had been loyal for a long time started to doubt, hesitate, and pay more attention. They were worried about the Watchers because they knew that straying from the path, even out of curiosity, can have effects that go far beyond what is first seen. The quiet tension that settled over heaven became a place to think, to understand, and to realize that even the smallest crack in obedience can cast shadows into places that are both seen and unseen. Even though heaven looked calm on the outside, Those who were in tune with its rhythm could feel the first tremors of consequence. The natural order, which used to be so smooth, now seemed more fragile and more aware of what the watchers were doing and how people were reacting. Angels, feeling the ripples, were drawn into deep thought, balancing observation with worry and curiosity with restraint. Their doubt, their chamoshi, and their fear were all mixed together, creating a tapestry of awareness that reminded them that even immortal beings have to deal with decisions that once seemed easy. The lesson that came out of all of this was that order is always dependent on the choices of the people who live in it, even though it is strong and lasts a long time. The watchers had acted out of curiosity and desire, and the heavens began to take in the results in silence. Doubt and fear are not weaknesses in the immortal heart. They are signs, gentle reminders that even those who are closest to God have to find a balance between curiosity, action, and restraint. In this first wave of trouble, heaven's silence said a lot, marking the start of a new chapter where choice, observation, and consequence would always be linked. As the watchers walked among people, teaching and guiding them, a small change started to happen. From the quiet union of interest and action came beings that were not fully human or fully angelic, children whose presence seemed to connect two worlds. People later called these kids the Nephilim. They had echoes of both worlds inside them, human weakness mixed with glimpses of heavenly wisdom. Their lives were quiet but deep, a living proof of the Watcher's oath and the quiet effects of sharing knowledge before the world was ready. Some people later thought they were monsters, but they were really symbolic bridges that carried both promise and pain, light and shadow in their souls. For the Watchers, seeing these kids was a personal and haunting experience. The children showed both the purity of human potential and the weight of angelic awareness. They were curious, emotional, and strong in ways that neither parent fully understood. Each child born between worlds had a subtle complexity that showed the union that had never been meant to fully show. The Watchers, who had been watching people from afar for so long, now felt the pain of being close to them. They were happy to see people grow, but they also knew how fragile and limited human life is. The emotional impact of these kids made them feel both tender and heavy, with hope and sadness mixed together. Parents also felt this small change. They held kids who seemed to know more than they should have at their age, with eyes that showed wisdom, longing, or sadness that wasn't all theirs. There was an unspoken tension, a feeling that these kids were connected to something bigger, something that people can't understand, but that was very human in how weak they were. Families watched in awe, and sometimes in fear, as their children grew up in a world that wasn't completely theirs, caught between the real world and the unseen heavens. The Watchers were there, but they were quiet. They felt an echo of the human struggle, the realization that love and care couldn't protect them from the weight of dual inheritance. The Book of Enoch captures this delicate tension in a way that makes it sound poetic. The Nephilim, who were both angels and humans, were a living example of both wonder and consequence. They were quiet, powerful children, but their presence brought a soft sadness, a reminder that life made by bringing together different worlds is rarely easy. Their laughter could light up a room, and their tears could carry the weight of generations. They were aware of unseen forces, which gave them a quiet seriousness that made normal people stop and think. They were bridges, but bridges always have tension, and those who crossed them felt the weight of two worlds coming together. The watchers weren't completely unprepared, but they were still affected by a complicated emotional reality. They had acted out of curiosity and the desire to teach and guide, but now they had to deal with the human effects of being close to someone and being together. The kids showed how beautiful and complicated these choices were. Every smile, every show of interest, and every small insight showed not only the influence of angels, but also the deep emotional depth of being human. The watchers felt both pride and sadness, joy and restraint, awareness and vulnerability as they watched the Nephilim. Their emotions were more complex than the simple task they had set out to do. There was also a quiet feeling of loss. For the people watching, these kids were real reminders of what had changed forever. The innocence of early humans was mixed with angelic knowledge. This union brought wonder, but it also brought an unspoken awareness of how limited, fragile, and eventually lost things are. Each child bore the delicate tension of existence between realms, a reminder that beauty and pain frequently coexist, and that the endowment of understanding and power can impose unforeseen burdens. The watchers felt a kind of sadness that wasn't despair or regret, but a gentle awareness of how heavy the consequences were. People in general also started to notice these kids. Even though there weren't many of them, they had a big impact. They moved among people with a quiet awareness, instinctively understanding both compassion and complexity. They did things that showed they were wise beyond their years. People in the villages talked about people who had unusual powers, like strength, wisdom, or perception, that went beyond what was expected. But there was always a softness in the telling, a sense that these were not beings to be afraid of, but to watch with careful awe, because they were something both amazing and fragile. The watchers felt both pride and a little worry, because they knew the truth behind the whispers. Every interaction made them think about how fragile life is between the divine and mortal realms. The kids themselves moved through a world that was both familiar and strange. They felt love, curiosity, and fear, like real people do. But their awareness of what they couldn't see affected everything they did and thought. Some people felt lonely in a subtle way because they knew they were different, but not completely separate. Some people accepted their dual heritage and learned how to use bits of celestial insight in their everyday lives. The watchers saw each moment as a lesson, and each decision the Nephilim made showed how hard it is to balance power, responsibility, and emotional depth. The quiet observation of these children turned into a lasting meditation on the link between knowledge, emotion, and consequence. This theme would echo through generations in both small and big ways. The Nephilim grew, but they were still a soft, living reminder of the Watchers' choices. They kept the tension between what had been given too soon and what could be grown over time going. Their lives, which were full of wonder and fragility, were a reflection of the emotional impact of the Watchers' mission. The beauty of teaching, the difficulty of intervening, and the subtle pain that comes when love and duty meet in a place where the divine and human meet. The Watchers felt the quiet weight of connection, longing, and the delicate, tender effects that happen when worlds unexpectedly come together in harmony. Long before the Watchers came down and human history began to change because of celestial knowledge, there was a quiet group of angels whose job was to watch without getting involved. These angels moved through the world without being seen. Their presence was like a soft whisper at the edges of perception, a silent reminder that life was never really alone. A guardian was always with each person, Whether they were working in the fields, walking through towns, or resting under the stars, the guardian's eyes saw every joy, every sorrow, and every fleeting moment that would later shape the tapestry of existence. They were quiet companions with a common goal. They had a deep but limited understanding of people, and their job was to find the right balance between watching and caring. The watcher's actions were very different from this calm order. Some angels wanted to get involved, teach, or be interesting, but guardian angels stayed true to their mission. They didn't correct or guide people directly. Instead, they made sure that every moment of human experience happened naturally, like a river flowing over rocks and valleys. They had a patience that could only be measured in lifetimes, and they were devoted to the unseen rhythms of life that required them to be aware of both the fragility and strength of mortal existence. They knew that even the smallest push could have effects that were hard to understand, so they chose to stay quiet, which would always be a witness to the story of humanity. Angels could feel the depth of human emotion in ways that were personal and often hidden in this quiet observation. They were aware of every little thing, like the laughter of children, the sadness of people who had lost loved ones, the sweet moments of first love, and the quiet moments of reflection. They bore the burden of empathy without intervening, their presence serving as a gentle counterbalance to life's turbulence. People lived in the moment, not knowing that angels were watching them closely. But the angels' silent watchfulness made sure that even the smallest acts of bravery, kindness, or love were remembered and recorded in the unseen records of eternity. Guardian angels were closely connected to the human heart, even though they couldn't do much. They moved like shadows next to their charges, always there when needed, even when they weren't seen. These heavenly witnesses held a child who was scared at night, a traveler who was lost in a storm, and a soul who was looking for comfort. They had a duty that required both humility and presence, as well as the understanding that intervening, no matter how well-intentioned, could interfere with the natural growth of experience. Watching without interfering wasn't passive. It required being aware all the time, being in tune with your feelings, and having a deep respect for the story of life as it unfolds. The angels knew how things worked, not so they could control them, but so they could keep them from going wrong in a big way. They knew when danger was near, but their actions were small and often hard to see: a gust of wind moving a step, a shadow falling across a path, or a fleeting instinct that entered a person's mind. These weren't miracles in the obvious sense. They were small changes that kept the natural flow going. People often thought that chance or coincidence was to blame, not knowing that there was a silent force keeping them in sync with the rhythm of life. The angels carried this knowledge without pride or needing to be recognized. They were bound by duty and love that didn't need to be recognized. Over time, guardian angels watched as people grew, learned, and made mistakes. They saw families come together and break up, communities grow and shrink, and people deal with the ups and downs of love, fear, hope, and despair. Every action a person took, big or small, was a note in a huge symphony of life. The angels made sure that no note was lost and that every moment was seen. The angels had a tender and wide view of life because of the quiet weight of this duty. They saw life as both fragile and strong. Angels stayed away from each other even when there was a fight. Wars, arguments, rivalries, and betrayals happened right in front of them, but they were never supposed to get involved directly. They knew that growth comes from both help and hard work. They knew that the human heart had to learn to deal with pain and joy, fear and love, without the constant help of heavenly beings. The constant struggle between wanting to do something and having the discipline to stay a witness was like a silent meditation that reflected the heavens' eternal patience. The guardians were most important when they were alone. A traveler walking under the moonlight, a mother holding her newborn, and a scholar lost in thought, all felt a subtle sense of comfort, as if they were not alone but didn't know why. The angels moved around in this quiet place. Their awareness was a soft presence, a gentle recognition that every human life, no matter how ordinary, was a part of a bigger story, seen, acknowledged, and held within the timeless fabric of existence. The guardian angels kept their promise, even as the Watchers' interference started to change human history. They saw not only the effects of the Watchers' decisions, but also how strong human hearts are and how mortals took in, changed, and sometimes went beyond the gifts and burdens that were given to them. Their silence was not absence. It was presence in its most profound form. They were always there, watching, a quiet contrast to the amazing things that were happening over the years. They reminded the heavens and the Watchers that some guidance is best given not through action, but through steady, loving observation. Through their quiet watchfulness, the angels reinforced the idea that true guardianship is not about being in charge or in charge of others, but about seeing, supporting, and protecting. In their joys and sorrows, successes and failures, each person was held in a gentle embrace of attention that was not seen. The Watchers, on the other hand, had gone too far with this balance. The guardian angels, on the other hand, kept reminding the heavens that even when things are changing, some order stays the same in the stillness of observation. They also reminded everyone that every life, no matter how short, is sacred and recognized in the silent, unbroken vigil of those who watch without interfering. There are angels in the quiet corners of the heavens whose job is not to intervene or give advice, but to watch in the most careful way possible, by recording human lives. Every action, thought, and intention is recorded and carefully kept in scrolls that go beyond what humans can understand. These scrolls create a tapestry of existence that reflects the story of the world as it unfolds. These angels move without making a sound, and mortals can't see them, but they notice every detail, every fleeting moment, and every choice that affects the course of their own and the world's fate. The heavens, in their vastness, depend on these scribes to keep things going, to record the complex interplay of choice, chance, and consequence, and to bear witness to the threads of life that often go unnoticed. Recording is both personal and fair. These angels don't judge. They just watch and keep things safe. The laughter of children in a sunny courtyard, the soft promises made under the branches of a fig tree, and the sad tears of people who have lost loved ones are all written with the same care. The scrolls show not only what people are doing, but also the hidden thoughts and feelings that go along with each choice. In this way, the history of people becomes more than just a list of events. It becomes a picture of the inner world, a ghostly map of hearts, minds, and feelings that people may not fully understand. To picture this work, think of a lot of delicate scrolls unfurling across the sky, each one with the faint glow of life on it. Angels move between them like caretakers, adding details, keeping memories alive, and sometimes watching how events from different generations are connected. A farmer putting a seed in the ground, a child learning to walk, or a traveler stopping to look at the stars. All of these things, no matter how small, add to a huge record of all human experiences. It is a quiet job that those whose lives are being recorded don't notice or acknowledge, but it is important for the world's harmony and memory. In a way, these heavenly records are like the digital footprints of today. Every action, every choice, and every word leaves a mark, whether it's easy to see right away or slowly fades away. The difference is in how deeply they see. Angels see intention and feeling along with action, so they see not only what is done, but also the quiet reasons that are in the heart. Modern traces of life are often shallow, fleeting, and broken up, but the scrolls in heaven tell a complete, flowing story that moves with the rhythm of human experience and is full of both meaning and subtlety. The Book of Enoch alludes to these scribes without fully disclosing them, indicating that divine attention extends beyond explicit intervention. The angels who write down what happens do so with respect, knowing that every life is both normal and special. Every action, no matter how small, adds to the bigger picture and can have effects that last for generations. The scribes are immortal, but they feel a quiet connection to people. They feel the joy, sadness, and subtle emotions of the people they watch, but they always keep enough distance to stay neutral. These angels often work with other angels, like guardians or watchers, but their job is always to be passive. Some angels teach, guide, or watch over people to keep them safe, but the recorder's job is completely separate from everything else. They watch without getting in the way, write down what they see without judging it, and capture the full complexity of human life. The scrolls become a silent reminder of divine awareness, a reminder that every action, no matter how small, is remembered, preserved, and woven into the endless tapestry of life. The process is very complicated and exact. An angel might see the slight pause in a person's step, the unspoken desire in a look, or the quiet bravery in a small, unnoticed act. These details, even though you can't see them, are woven into the bigger picture, creating patterns and connections that go beyond what you can see right now. These moments' echoes come back generations later, subtly changing events, choices, and perceptions. All of this is recorded in the quiet, bright archives of heaven. People often think that their actions are lost once they fade from memory, but this careful observation shows that they are not. But the angel's scrolls show how important even the most mundane moments can be. Every little thing we do, whether it's a kind act, a moment of curiosity, a choice made out of fear or hope, or anything else, adds to the story and is kept in a record that lasts forever. In this way, the heavens hold a memory of humanity that is more complete than humans can understand. They are a living archive that helps people understand and respect all forms of life. Even when things are crazy and people don't seem to be making good choices, the angels keep working hard. A bright ledger that takes into account the complexities and subtleties of life keeps track of battles, losses, victories, and disasters without bias. The scrolls become a mirror not only of action but of consequence, showing how moments connect and spread out, changing experiences that are not immediately obvious. Every life and every choice is given the same careful attention, making sure that the story of humanity is never lost, never diminished, and always seen in its most complete, emotional, and spiritual form. The angels who write down people's lives remind us that life is made up of many moments, and that every thought, feeling, and action adds to a bigger story. They keep not only the facts of life, but also the essence, the unseen currents that give human experience its texture. Through their quiet, patient work. They are silent witnesses, chroniclers of history and emotion, and their presence is a subtle reassurance that even when unnoticed, life is observed, valued, and remembered in the vast, enduring memory of the heavens. When the world is quiet at night, angels often don't speak with voices that echo through the air. Instead, they speak through dreams, which is a subtle, almost imperceptible language that is woven into the mind. When you sleep, you have visions, and when you think, you hear whispers. Moments of insight come to you like soft shadows dancing at the edge of your mind. This language is soft, personal, and deep, and it carries messages that words or actions can't always say. People who aren't used to the quiet ways of heaven sometimes think these visions are just their imagination, but they actually contain a gentle guidance that affects their choices, perceptions, and understanding. In this way, dreams become the hidden threads that connect the earthly and the divine, the seen and the unseen, in a conversation that is both personal and eternal. The angels chose to talk to people through dreams on purpose, showing both humility and patience. These angels know how to be subtle, unlike the Watchers, who boldly stepped in and changed the course of history. They don't require you to pay attention or follow their advice. They just suggest, hint, and nudge you. The human mind can take in information without being scared or disturbed by it in a number of ways, such as a whisper of intuition, a fleeting image, or a scenario that plays out in sleep. In this quiet way, lessons are more about feeling than hearing, and more about thinking than being told what to do. Dreams let people find their own way, while still being connected to the heavenly presence in a subtle way. People have always thought of dreams as both strange and holy. People in ancient times thought that night visions were messages from God that connected them to places they couldn't see. Like in many cultures, dreams in Ethiopia were not just fantasies. They were times when the unseen world touched the real world. The Ge'ez scriptures suggest these exchanges by talking about visions that gave people advice, warnings, and glimpses of truths that were otherwise hidden. Angels, by speaking through dreams, create a closeness that is not often noticed, but has a big effect. Their silence in waking life keeps the natural flow of human experience going, and the quiet language of night encourages thought, discovery, and emotional connection. The things that happen in these dreams change in small ways and for different reasons. A vision can be literal, like a warning of danger, a path to follow, or a lesson in virtue. At other times, it is symbolic, showing pictures that speak to feelings and intuition rather than giving clear directions. In a dream, a river might bend, which could mean a change in direction. A bird flying could mean freedom or caution. When you sleep, you can see these pictures more clearly, and they tell you things that your conscious mind might not want to hear or might not understand if you saw them directly. Angels communicate best in this gentle way, changing how people see things without giving them direct orders. Dreams can be very intense for people. The emotions they experience persist upon awakening, sensations that appear too intense to be coincidental. This way of talking is gentle. Guidance comes without force, knowledge comes without stress, and understanding grows in the fertile soil of the unconscious mind. In essence, dreams let angels be unseen friends who give advice and warnings while still respecting people's freedom and ability to choose. People receive the subtle advice of celestial beings while they sleep, when they are most vulnerable and unaware of where it comes from. The impressions left behind have a big effect on them. Angels' whispers in dreams also keep a sense of mystery and awe alive. If they had spoken with too much clarity, the human heart might have been too much for it to handle, or the natural flow of events might have been broken. Angels honor the delicate balance between guidance and independence, intervention and observation, by using dreams as their language. The message's subtlety encourages thought, letting the person who gets it connect with insight in a personal and meaningful way. The guidance is not immediate or clear, but it stays with you long after the dream has faded from your memory. This language also has a very deep emotional side. Dreams can give the sleeper comfort, peace of mind, or a gentle warning. They often show what the sleeper needs emotionally. Someone who is grieving might have a dream that comforts them, and someone who is having a hard time making a decision might get some clarity through symbols or feelings. The angels know how people feel and change their messages to fit the situation and how open the person is to receiving them. In this way, the language of dreams becomes more than just a way to talk to each other. It becomes a reflection of the soul, a gentle exchange between living hearts and immortal beings. People have talked about these experiences for a long time, but they don't always know where they come from. A dream, a flash of insight, or a pattern that becomes clear in your mind, these could all be signs that angels are watching you. Angels speak in a way that is kind, persistent, and respects people's freedom. Angels stay quiet in waking life so that people can find, understand, and use the guidance on their own. This creates a partnership in which learning is self-directed but still supported by the presence of angels. Even if dreams are broken, short, or hard to understand, they still have an effect. Things start to make sense, choices change, and understanding grows, as if an unseen hand has gently guided the heart and mind. Angels make sure that people stay interested in life, can think about things, and listen to their gut feelings by using this subtle method. So, dreams are proof of how quietly patient these beings are. They are a long-lasting, delicate bridge between worlds that doesn't break the fragile rhythm of life. The night, with its quiet stillness, becomes the setting for this quiet conversation. Stars may drift by without being seen. Shadows may stretch across the room, and the human mind, which is between sleep and wakefulness, hears angels whispering. It is a communication that honors the natural flow of life, one that encourages growth without interruption, and understanding without being told what to do. In dreams, people see angels not as powerful beings to fear or worship, but as kind friends who guide them softly, remind them subtly, and witness the journey of each soul as it moves through the quiet wonder of life. When the Watcher's choices had effects on the world, the heavens didn't respond with loud announcements or the noise of immediate judgment. Instead, there was a quiet discussion, a stillness that was heavier than any storm. This was the moment when intervention would become necessary. The Watchers, who had once walked freely among people, teaching, guiding, and sometimes tempting them, were now pulled into a gravity that neither humans nor angels could ignore. There was no trumpet or dramatic announcement. Instead, the heavenly realms slowly came into alignment with purpose. People realized that some actions could no longer go unpunished, and that order, though gently enforced, had to be restored. Chains were not made of iron or stone. They were made of authority and the heavy weight of God's will. They wrapped around the Watchers in a way that was quiet and unavoidable. Each link was a choice, a line that had been crossed, and a duty that could not be undone. The binding was not loud or violent. It was planned, patient, and unavoidable. The watchers had never thought about how serious it is to hold back, how strong it is to judge without making a sound, but with absolute certainty. The darkness that followed them wasn't punishment in the usual sense. It was a necessary shadow, a place to think, endure, and see the effects of choices that change the natural flow of life and history. The watchers, who had been observers and guides, were now the ones being watched. They moved without making a sound, but they were aware of every heartbeat, breath, and thought, as if the chains could read their intentions. The heavens, in their wisdom, made a system that was both protective and corrective, a containment that let people think without destroying their essence. The watchers felt the weight of their choices in this stillness, not as a punishment shouted from the sky, but as a patient, deliberate truth that pressed quietly on their immortal souls. Within this space, time felt both endless and limited. Darkness spread out like a soft blanket, neither friendly nor unfriendly, just there. In this space, the watchers felt the small differences that come with being absent. The lack of influence, the lack of immediate response, and the lack of freedom they had always taken for granted. Their thoughts became their friends, and their regrets and reflections bounced off the walls of restraint that they couldn't see. The silence was deep, but they found an understanding of boundaries, duty, and the heavy weight of choices that go beyond what they could see at the time. The binding also sent a message, both to angels and to people, that was both subtle and strong. It was a reminder that power comes with responsibility, that curiosity without wisdom can have effects that are hard to predict, and that order has its own authority, even when it is quiet. The watchers were not left alone. Even though they were locked up, they were watched, guided, and recorded in the great flow of the heavens. The chains were a fragile balance, a necessary step that kept both the human and celestial worlds safe without destroying the basic structure of life. The people who were watching had time to figure out what they had missed while they were waiting. Their initial interest in human knowledge, their desire to connect different worlds, and their subtle interference all became parts of the fabric of restraint. Every thought of teaching and every urge to step in now had the weight of a lesson that couldn't be ignored. The binding wasn't a sign of hate or punishment. It was a reminder of a basic truth. Even those who are closest to divine insight must face limits, because wisdom and authority are always linked to responsibility. The darkness around the watchers wasn't just a lack of light. It was a quiet reflection of what they were doing. Shadows grew longer around every thought and choice, showing the ripples that had spread through history and into people's lives. In this darkness, the watchers had to deal with the small truths of what would happen. No one yelled or condemned anyone, but the weight of responsibility was real, pushing down with the soft but undeniable force of inevitability. The experience changed me, not because I was scared, but because it slowly opened my eyes to how freedom, action, and consequence all work together. The watchers looked at people from a distance, even though they were stuck in the invisible but unbreakable bonds. Their eyes, which had been active and direct, became thoughtful as they were forced to hold back. They saw how strong human hearts are and how quietly people lived their lives without knowing about the heavenly dramas going on above them. In the quiet of binding, the watchers saw how beautiful and fragile the world they had touched was. Every act of kindness, every moment of bravery, and even the problems that came from not knowing or being afraid were stored in their minds as part of a continuum that went beyond what they could see at the time. The watchers were changed by chains, darkness, and waiting not by loud correction, but by small changes. They learned that real awareness comes not just from doing things, but also from thinking about them, being patient, and knowing what will happen if you make a choice. In the quiet stillness, they learned how to control themselves, how important it is to watch without getting involved, and how heavy the emotional burden of responsibility can be. They understood that judgment without yelling has a lasting effect that goes beyond the immediate punishment. It teaches, shapes, and preserves in a way that is both gentle and lasting, and it is both subtle and very powerful. Even though they were locked up, the Watchers were still a part of the big picture of life. The world of people kept changing, shaped in part by what they had done before, and softened by the lessons they had learned in chains. Time slowed down, experience grew, and the fragile line between freedom and consequence, curiosity and wisdom, became clearer than ever. In the silence, the Watchers saw not only the choices they made, but also the story of humanity as it unfolded. This story was woven together with their presence, their restraint, and the quiet, patient judgment of the heavens. At one point, the heavens, in their great wisdom, chose to be quiet. The angels, who had once walked among people to teach, guide, and watch, slowly stopped speaking and interfering, letting the world go on its own way. This withdrawal was not abandonment. It was a conscious choice, a quiet, planned retreat that marked the start of a new era in human history. The world, which had once been subtly connected to the heavens, was now going through events without clear direction. Not as an empty space, but as a deep one where people would learn, make mistakes, and grow in a way that was not limited by angelic influence. The choice to be quiet wasn't sudden. Angels saw what happened when people interfered, and knew that for people to grow, they needed both freedom and struggle. The Watchers had once crossed the line between heaven and earth too boldly, changing the way that human knowledge and morality naturally grew. On the other hand, the silent angels stepped back and let the rhythms of life take over. Their retreat made things quiet and tense, a place where people would face challenges head-on, feel the weight of their own choices, and find strength, creativity, and moral insight in ways that couldn't have been taught. Silence was, in a way, a language all its own. The angels didn't say anything, but their absence taught us about being patient, holding back, and trusting the journey of life as it unfolds. People didn't know about the heavenly decision. They only saw the changing tides of fortune, the unpredictability of events, and the subtle mysteries of life. The angels watched from a distance, taking in the bigger picture of history and noting patterns, consequences, and how people reacted to both good and bad times. They saw civilizations rise and fall, leaders come and go, and regular people make quiet choices, all without any clear angelic guidance. There was a new rhythm in the world. When there weren't any guiding hands around, people learned to trust their instincts, think things through, and pass on what they knew to the next generation. Culture, art, morality, and law began to develop organically, influenced by the conditions of life rather than direct divine guidance. People had both moments of deep understanding and moments of sudden failure, and each taught them something. The angel's silence was not just a passive observation. It was an active trust in the potential of humanity to grow and change. They knew that growth often happens most strongly when there isn't constant guidance. In this time, the subtle signs of angels' presence persisted, albeit in a less overt manner. Guardian angels still watched quietly, taking notes, witnessing, and giving gentle nudges in dreams or fleeting intuition. But the big interventions stopped. People felt the world in its rawness, how unpredictable nature is, how fragile life is, and how powerful personal choice is. Even without the loud presence of divine messengers, the patterns of morality, courage, and compassion began to emerge naturally, shaped by human experience rather than celestial decree. The silence itself became a teacher, with its lessons hidden in the results of actions, the choices made, and the slow unfolding of fate. The change from intervention to silence happened slowly, almost without anyone noticing. Some people may have felt the absence as a soft separation, a strange fading of voices that used to echo in the back of their minds. Some people didn't know about the divine connection and just lived in the world as it was, with all its beauty, unpredictability, and challenges. During this quiet time, people were able to be creative, use their intuition, and be strong. Without direct instruction, people started to ask questions, look for answers, and push the limits of what they knew. This opened up a new way of learning that came from real-life experiences instead of heavenly teachings. Silence also gave people time to think. Without constant guidance, people had to deal with the effects of their actions right away, and with more force. Wars, conflicts, joys, and discoveries provided opportunities to comprehend morality, responsibility, and interconnectedness in ways that could not be conveyed through lectures or demonstrations. The angels, watching from a distance, saw these lessons unfold and took note of the patterns of human behavior and the values that came from real-life experiences. Their quiet presence acted as an invisible safety net, making sure that even though guidance was taken away, observation and subtle influence stayed in the background, keeping things going and giving them a new perspective. This time marked the start of a world where people were more in charge of their own lives and had to deal with the consequences of their actions more fully. The stillness of the heavens was not a lack of care, but a change in approach, from intervention to trust, from teaching to watching, and from direct guidance to letting things grow naturally. The angels honored the independence of human life by keeping an invisible framework of observation and protection in place. This made sure that lessons learned were based on experience, thought, and the effects of actions. As time went on, the echoes of angelic silence kept changing how people thought. The lessons that were once taught directly were now learned and showed up in creativity, empathy, courage, and moral judgment. People learned how to deal with both the good and the bad things in life. They weren't always guided by celestial direction. Instead, they were guided by the lasting effects of past interventions and the quiet, almost invisible support of watchers who weren't there. In a way, the silence became a partner in human development, letting the rhythms of choice, struggle, and insight create a space where wisdom and strength could grow naturally. Angels were still very interested, even when they were quietly watching from afar. They saw civilizations rise and fall, the ebb and flow of human hearts, and the slow change of morality and understanding. Their silence was not a lack of presence or care. It was a conscious and patient presence that let life grow in all its complexity. People didn't know exactly how things worked above them, but they experienced the world directly, making history through trial and error, reflection, and the delicate balance of instinct and intention. Not control, but freedom. Not instruction, but experience. And in that quiet partnership, the human story found its new rhythm. As nations rose and fell, empires grew and fell, and angels quietly watched over the story of how humans govern themselves. These heavenly beings were not rulers or builders of empires, but they were always there, like a quiet current beneath the surface of history. Every country and every ruler had duties that went beyond the present. Angels assigned to them kept a close eye on them, noting their choices, guiding them when necessary, and recording the effects of power as it moved through human hands. Their influence wasn't obvious. It was built into the events themselves, making people responsible without taking away their free will. Angels who were with kings and leaders saw how grand and fragile human ambition could be. Thrones, palaces, and armies were clear signs of power, but the angels were aware of what was going on underneath. The ruler's goals, fears, and desires. They saw the small acts of honesty and the small temptations that could lead to corruption. And they thought about the effects that might last for generations. They knew that power wasn't just about giving orders or winning. It came with a heavy responsibility to everyone who would be affected by decisions, whether they were close by or far away, personal or societal. The angels wrote down these lessons carefully and patiently, keeping in mind the fine line between power and responsibility. Heaven never saw empires as one big thing. Every city, village, and person in a kingdom had an impact on the tapestry of power. Angels who were in charge of nations didn't just watch over the leaders. They also saw the subtle changes in society, the flow of trade, the whispers of culture, and the beats of loyalty and dissent. The rise of an empire was more than just winning battles. It was the coming together of countless people's choices, decisions, and hopes, all watched over by celestial eyes. In this way, angels were both witnesses and protectors, making sure that the story of human power stayed connected to morality, responsibility, and the subtle reflection of divine principles. Angels and kings did not have a direct relationship of control. Instead, they were gentle stewards of each other. A leader might feel their gut instinct, an unexpected idea that comes to them when they have to make a decision, or a quiet doubt before they do something that will have big effects. Angels who knew that people needed help without being forced to do so made these subtle suggestions. Power, if not kept in check, could lead to oppression or arrogance. With the help of angels, leaders were given an invisible mirror that showed them how heavy their choices were and what might happen as a result. At times, this guidance manifested as insight, at other times as dreams, and at still other times as an internal awareness that prompted contemplation prior to action. In this heavenly context, accountability went beyond the here and now. Angels saw not only the choices that were made, but also how they would affect the future. For example, how a king's choices would affect future generations, how the rise or fall of a city would affect nearby lands, and how culture, morality, and social structures would react. They noticed patterns that people couldn't always see, but they wrote them down carefully so that the heavens could remember everything from each time period. The angel's presence was a quiet reminder that every action has an effect, every choice leaves a mark, and every life touched by leadership is part of a bigger, more connected story. The angels had to be quiet sometimes when people made bad choices. A ruler may act out of greed, fear, or ignorance, and the angel assigned would watch without stepping in right away. These moments were not neglect, but intentional observation, safeguarding the sanctity of human agency while documenting the inevitable repercussions that ensued. History, molded by the aggregation of decisions, unveiled lessons more profound than those attainable through direct rectification. The angels, who were always watching, made sure that responsibility was built into the way things naturally happened. They offered subtle guidance when they could, but they never interfered with the freedom that is necessary for growth. The relationship between angels and countries also went in circles. As empires rose and fell, the angels followed, changing where they focused their attention as the centers of power changed. They saw new leaders rise, laws change, and people do wise or foolish things that change the course of history. Every empire, no matter how big or when it was, had the threads of morality, decision-making, and consequence running through it, and they were all carefully watched and recorded. The angel's presence connected divine principles with human action, making sure that power stayed meaningful, measured, and accountable throughout history. Angels' subtle influence wasn't just limited to big gestures or important events. They saw how leaders made private decisions, how advisors gave advice, and how their consciences guided them in small choices that had big effects. Angels wrote down even the act of listening, thinking, or pausing before taking action as part of the complex system of government. These moments, which people often can't see, were very important in shaping the legacies of nations and the lessons of history that will last forever. The angels' patient attention turned everyday choices into threads of importance that were woven into the story of civilizations without anyone noticing. Angels who were in charge of nations and kings were both watchers and protectors, as well as witnesses and recorders. They were careful when they used their power, remembering their choices and letting people be free. The link between authority and accountability, which was both subtle and deep, was what made them so watchful. People may have thought that history was random, unpredictable, or only driven by ambition and circumstance. But in the quiet spaces of heaven, every rise and fall, every act of justice or misjudgment was seen, recorded, and understood in its larger context. Through this quiet partnership, the heavens stayed present and shaped the moral and practical sides of leadership. This made sure that power was always being watched and that every kingdom had the faint echo of divine memory within it. Some knowledge has always been passed on in whispers instead of shouts, in the quiet places where curiosity and restraint meet. There have always been texts and traditions that talked about angels and how they affect people, but most of them were never made public. The decisions of early councils and church leaders set the limits on what could be shared in public. This created a canon that took into account both spiritual and social concerns. Some stories, like those that show how heaven works and how angels guide people in subtle ways, were thought to be too complicated, too difficult, or too sensitive to be told to a lot of people. Their lessons were not lost. Rather, they traversed the silent corridors of faith, safeguarded by individuals who acknowledged their profundity and their capacity to evoke contemplation rather than prompt immediate response. Political, theological, and cultural factors played a role in the formation of the biblical canon in many parts of the world, especially in Europe. Some texts that looked at the complex role of angels, the subtleties of their tasks, and how they interacted with people were left out or pushed to the side. This didn't mean that the stories were false or unimportant. It just meant that they needed to be carefully cared for, and that those who could really understand the material were often the ones who taught it. The decisions of councils and leaders made it so that only the prepared or attentive reader could find certain celestial truths. In this way, knowledge was safe because it was quiet, which was a planned way to keep it from being misused or misunderstood. Ethiopia, on the other hand, took a different path. The Ethiopian biblical tradition, which has been kept alive in the Ge'ez language for hundreds of years, included texts that other areas did not include in their official canon. People took great care to pass down stories about angels, watchers, and heavenly guidance from one generation to the next. This unusual preservation wasn't an accident. It was a sign of a culture that was very in tune with spiritual memory, one that valued continuity over conformity and reflection over display. Even though the rest of the world had silenced or ignored them, the voices of angels still echoed in the scriptures in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian canon became a place to keep holy stories that spoke softly but deeply, showing parts of human history and divine interaction that were mostly hidden in other places. It wasn't random that they didn't want to share this information. Angels, watchers, and the effects of their actions had moral, free will, and human responsibility implications. It was dangerous to share such information without the right context, because it could lead to misunderstanding. People's ideas about power and morality are weak, and knowing that celestial beings are watching over us or interacting with us directly could easily make us afraid, proud, or confused. By keeping these lessons to themselves, the spiritual traditions protected both the wisdom of the heavens and the development of human conscience. Silence became a way to protect the subtle truths of angelic influence, making sure that only those who were ready to hear them could hear them, instead of shouting them out to everyone and having them be misheard. Even in Europe, parts of these stories lived on in apocryphal texts and the work of theologians who looked beyond the accepted canon. But these stories were not often used in regular teaching, and people were often wary or doubtful of them. They moved around quietly, and people who wanted to learn more about them studied them, always with a sense of respect for their fragile power. People knew that learning about angels, watchers, and their effects could change their lives, but they had to think about it, not just read it. The stories were meant to slowly wake up people's minds and make them think over time, not make them act or believe right away. The quiet way also kept the stories emotional and spiritual depth. Angels, by nature, work in a quiet way, changing the course of human events without needing to put on a show. Their presence, documented in these concealed texts, frequently necessitated attentiveness to nuance, patience, and empathy. It would have been wrong to shout these stories out loud because they were about beings that were very different from those who told them. The way these stories were kept alive, in a soft and understated way, let their lessons reflect the behavior of angels themselves, guiding, watching, and influencing without being too much, and shaping understanding through subtlety and care. Ethiopia's unique way of doing things made sure that the knowledge of angels stayed alive. The faithful read these texts not as things that happened a long time ago, but as things that were happening in their spiritual lives right now. Angels were not just ideas. They were part of a cosmic story that was connected to people's choices, morals, and fate. The wisdom in these stories was never lost. It was just quieted, waiting for people who would come with respect, curiosity, and a desire to listen closely. In this way, the quiet preservation of angelic knowledge became a gift, a way to meet the divine, not through show, but through thought, meditation, and the slow opening of awareness. The texts kept their integrity by never shouting these stories. They let the lessons of self-control, moral responsibility, and heavenly oversight stay clear, so that readers could think about them in depth. When knowledge is given gently, it makes people think about themselves. When it is forced on people, it can make them proud, afraid, or confused. The way these stories were kept showed how gentle and careful the angels were. The unique canon of Ethiopia's scriptures showed how powerful quiet can be, showing how deep truths can last when they are cared for and nurtured, not shouted about. In a nutshell, the quiet sharing of these stories protected both the wisdom of heaven and the progress of humanity. The traditions made sure that angels, watchers, and the lessons of their influence could be found and understood by those who were ready to meet them with open minds. They did this by choosing subtlety over spectacle and restraint over rush. The silence was not an absence, but a presence in a deeper sense. It was a steady, lasting whisper that let human history unfold under the watchful eyes of heavenly witnesses, carefully shaping memory and morality in a way that would echo through the ages. The stars moved in a way that only heaven and the celestial watchers who cared for them knew. Each spark of light that cut through the dark night sky was more than just a distant sun. It was a place of vigil, a point of focus where angels stood guard with unwavering devotion. The Book of Luminaries talks about these guardians who are always there. Even though most people can't see them, they watch over the movement, order, and beauty of the heavens. Each star, whether it was shining steadily or changing, held a memory of being watched over, a story of duty, and a quiet connection between the heavens and the earth. These angels weren't just watching, they were in charge of the cosmos's harmony, making sure that the movements above showed an order that could inspire, light up, and silently teach anyone who looked up in awe. People have always been drawn to the stars, but not many knew how much care went into each shining point of light. People in ancient times saw patterns, cycles, and alignments that suggested a more complex structure. In Ethiopia, these observations were connected to the teachings of angels, which connected heavenly patterns to the moral and spiritual rhythms of life on earth. The stars were more than just tools for finding your way or marking the seasons. They were signs of vigilance, protection, and continuity. Angels were in charge of keeping the balance in the universe, watching over the complex forces that controlled it, and making sure that the natural order stayed the same, even when people didn't understand it. Each angel assigned to a star was in charge of keeping it safe, and also had the more subtle job of influencing it. Their protection went beyond the physical world and affected events on Earth in ways that were deep but not obvious. A shepherd looking at the stars at night, a traveler lost in thought, or a child dreaming under the stars could all unknowingly feel the guidance, protection, or inspiration that these silent watchers gave them. The angels were always watching, and their presence was woven into the very fabric of light. This kept the stars, both markers of time and beacons of quiet continuity. There is a careful structure in the Book of Luminaries. Each angel knew which star they were in charge of and how it fit into the larger network of stars. Their work wasn't flashy or loud. It was careful, patient, and focused. They kept an eye on orbits, watched alignments, and kept the harmony that let the cycles of day and night, season and year, go on without a hitch. In this quiet work, there was an unspoken understanding of how everything is connected, from stars and planets to people and the invisible threads that connect them. Every movement and change was recorded, not to control, but to make sure that the fragile patterns of life stayed the same. Taking care of stars also had a moral aspect. Angels knew that the heavens were like mirrors of the order on earth. The rhythm and balance up there were like harmony, patience, and consistency that people could try to reach on their own level. The stars were reminders of how important it is to be patient, steady, and quietly watchful. A world watched over by such devoted beings might still have problems, mistakes, or failures. But the big picture gave people hope and a way to live with care and attention. Every glimmer above was a sign of this quiet discipline, a lesson written in light and movement that was waiting for those who were aware to see it. The angels moved among the stars with quiet care during the night when people were sleeping. They didn't get tired or ask for recognition. Their work wasn't for praise. It was to keep the skies in order, easy to navigate, and inspiring. In this quiet observance, they kept the cycles of time going, subtly affecting the seasons as they changed and guiding human intuition. This was often unnoticed, but deeply ingrained in the structure of reality. The stars themselves became living records of angelic care, with each point representing ongoing attention, protection, and cosmic memory. People who looked up at these lights often felt awe, fear, or longing, but they rarely understood the exact protection that made these experiences possible. The angels' work went beyond what people could see. It affected dreams, inspiration, and moments of insight that seemed personal but were really part of a bigger plan in the sky. When a person sees a comet, a planetary alignment, or the slow drift of the Milky Way, they may feel both awe and comfort, as if the angels are quietly guiding them without intruding, encouraging curiosity, and reminding them of the connection between life, sky, and spirit. Their care even changed the night. The light and dark, the shadows and light, were balanced so that the natural rhythms of sleep, reflection, and contemplation could happen. Without this careful protection, the natural cycles that keep life going might have been confusing, out of balance, or even chaotic. But the cosmos kept its delicate balance, with angels assigned to each star. This was a pattern of order that was felt more than understood, guiding how people saw and experienced things in ways that could never be shouted or forced. This delicate network has lasted through the ages. Empires came and went. People walked paths of light and shadow, and civilizations thrived under the same stars that had always moved with quiet accuracy. The angels never wavered. Each star kept shining, with its guardian by its side, a sign of care and continuity. Their presence was both real and symbolic. It was a reminder that even in the dark, order and attention were still there. Every human heart that looked up could see the quiet watchfulness of beings who never slept and whose watch went beyond time itself. People often feel like time is moving too fast, too hard, and too quickly. Days go by like water. Seasons change almost without us noticing, and the rhythm of life can seem crazy, driven by desire, ambition, and expectation. But from a celestial point of view, time isn't a river that needs to be crossed quickly. It's a carefully measured system that is kept with quiet accuracy. Angels, who are in charge of these rhythms, watch as hours, days, and years go by, with a level of patience that is beyond human comprehension. They control the cycles of the universe and the seasons, making sure that change happens at just the right speed, and that the natural flow of life follows a higher, divine order. Ethiopian texts like the Book of Luminaries talk about how these angels help keep peace in the world. Every year, every month, and every time the earth turns, beings who see time not as a list of things to do but as a way for life, growth, and learning to happen, watch over it. The movement of celestial bodies, the growth of plants, the flow of rivers, and even the small changes in human consciousness are all parts of a huge clockwork that is watched and cared for with great care. These angels make sure that the rhythm of life supports the development of potential, that there are natural times for rest, work, and reflection, and that the pattern of existence stays balanced, even though people are impatient. People often don't notice this quiet order in their daily lives. They clash with the universe's rhythm when they rush through tasks, worry about the results, or wish for faster progress. It takes time to learn virtues like patience, reflection, and timing. And the best way to do this is to go through frustration and realization. Angels, looking down from above, know that people have to fight against the natural flow of time. They don't step in to impose order, but they do support the underlying structure, which lets people experience both the frustration of impatience and the insight that comes from waiting. In this way, the seemingly ordinary passage of days becomes a holy chance to grow, with invisible hands controlling the pace of life. The seasons are a great example of how angels work. The changes in spring, summer, fall, and winter are not random. They are carefully planned, with celestial guardians in charge of each season's movement. Flowers bloom and die, rivers rise and fall, and even the way animals move around follows patterns that show careful care. People often don't notice or appreciate these changes, but the angels see their full importance, the chance to get ready, to learn, and to align one's own life with the grand cycles of creation. Every leaf that falls and every snowflake that drifts is part of a story that beings with eternal patience keep and watch. Controlling time is not only useful, it is also moral and spiritual. Angels keep the rhythm going, which gives people the chance to make choices, think things through, and learn about cause and effect. Impatience, haste, and neglect can ruin lives on earth. But from a celestial point of view, these mistakes are okay because they teach us something. People may not see how a late harvest affects their own growth, but angels do. They see how events are linked and how small changes can have big effects on lives and generations. As they watch over time, it becomes a teacher, a guide, and a force that keeps things stable, reminding people that life is unfolding in a planned, measured, and meaningful way. Even when things are going wrong, like storms, natural disasters, or plans that suddenly fall through, the angels' focus on time makes sure that recovery, learning, and renewal are always possible. People may not be able to see right away that events that seem random or chaotic are part of a bigger pattern. These patterns, which the angels oversee, help life adapt and go on, keeping both the lessons of mistakes and the chances to grow. Angels keep a structure that supports resilience, reflection, and continuity by managing the temporal and seasonal frameworks. This is true even when daily life seems random. People's impatience often clashes with this divine rhythm. We want results too quickly, want to understand things too quickly, and try to fit the natural cycles of life into moments that can't hold them. The angels' work reminds us that to really understand something, we have to wait, watch, and line up with the bigger patterns that shape our lives. People may see the rhythm that underlies the passage of time in dreams, reflections, or quiet moments of insight. They may sense that the world is not chaotic, but gently guided, with every second measured, every season orchestrated, and every life intertwined with the cycles of creation. In this angelic sense, time is not a punishment or something that happens by chance. It is an order that allows for growth, teaches patience, and helps people understand. Angels make sure that every time the earth rotates, every time the seasons change, and every moment that passes has both physical and spiritual meaning. Their watchfulness is quiet and unassuming, but it is always there. It creates a framework that lets people live life to the fullest, in a reliable, planned, and holy way. The divine rhythm, which is not visible to those who are in a hurry, moves steadily through history, providing continuity, opportunity, and the gentle reminder that every moment has its purpose, and every season comes when it is meant to. Angels change the flow of time into a living story by watching over it. When human experiences are in sync with the cosmic rhythm, they become part of a story that goes beyond individual lives and connects generations, cultures, and civilizations. Angels watch over and subtly guide patience, attention, and harmony, which shape the course of human history in ways that are deeply felt, even when they aren't noticed. Every sunrise, every change of the seasons, and every quiet hour of reflection become part of a tapestry that these celestial beings keep. This reminds us that time is more than just moments. It is a sacred order that guardians who never get tired keep, and their vigilance lets the world unfold with quiet grace. Ethiopian beliefs hold that death is not a solitary journey, but rather a sudden conclusion that leaves the soul adrift. From the earliest texts and oral traditions, it is known that every person has a companion, a gentle presence that stays with the soul until it dies. Angels, who are often invisible but are very close to each person, guide this passage with a gentle care that is like the care they give throughout life. Instead of being a scary or terrifying moment, death becomes a transition, a journey from one world to another, made smooth and sacred by the presence of these heavenly guides. These angels change the way people think about death. Even when they are weak or confused, a dying person feels a sense of quiet protection. The soul, which is aware of this companionship in small ways, feels comforted, as if it is not alone, and that every breath, heartbeat, and memory has been seen and honored. In Ethiopia, rituals and prayers often acknowledge this invisible presence by calling on angels to help the dead and asking that the passage be smooth, measured, and peaceful. The idea is simple but deep. Life doesn't end suddenly, and death isn't punishment. It's a carefully planned transition that is framed by kindness, order, and grace. This advice is very personal. Every angel knows the soul they are with, including its past, its joys and sorrows, its struggles and victories. The Ethiopian Scriptures talk about this friendship in ways that feel very close, like family. Angels remember the person's choices, kind acts, acts of faith, and even mistakes. They do this without judging the person, and instead offer comfort and assurance. The soul, in turn, moves with less fear because it senses a connection beyond the physical world and sees the transition as a journey instead of an abrupt departure. This way of thinking about death also teaches us how to see things from different points of view. People often fear the end of life because they only see loss, absence, and separation. But with the quiet presence of angelic escorts, death becomes a mirror for how life could be lived with patience, awareness, and paying attention to the unseen forces that shape experience. While a person is alive, they are always watched over by guardians who keep the balance between the cosmos and the earth, subtly guiding their choices, paths, and results. When someone dies, this companionship grows stronger, showing the same care. But now it's focused on the soul's journey beyond the physical world. The change is smooth, almost unnoticeable, like a feather floating on the water with the help of beings whose watchfulness never ends. The Ethiopian texts say that angels planned the journey and made it possible for people to go through places that are hard for them to see. They make the way easier, help people deal with their fears, and give people time to think and let go. These heavenly beings are like anchors for people who die suddenly or in a lot of pain, making sure that their souls don't get lost in shock or confusion. The journey is planned, organized, and full of meaning, which shows that death is not an accident or random end, but a carefully thought-out part of life, time, and divine order. This viewpoint also signifies a more comprehensive comprehension of human existence. Death, as a significant transition, is profoundly connected to the rhythms of existence perceived by angels from birth onward. Guardians who have watched over a person since they were a baby continue to do so until the end of their life. This is a connection between the seen and the unseen, the physical and the spiritual. The movement of the soul is not a break, but part of a larger story that connects generations, families, and communities into a larger pattern of care and remembrance. Every life and every ending is recognized and guided, showing that both attention and the divine are always there. People who know or feel this companionship often deal with death in a different way. Even people who don't know about the angels may feel moments of great peace, see visions of light, or feel their fear fade away as they face their last hours. Families also feel a quiet sense of comfort, knowing that the person who died is not alone and that something beyond normal perception will make sure they have a safe journey. In this way, Ethiopian beliefs change death from a moment of despair into an opportunity for reflection, gratitude, and calm acceptance. Angels make the transition not only bearable but also holy, a journey filled with purpose, rhythm, and love. The idea of attended death also affects how people value life. Knowing that angels are watching over the soul makes people respect each person's journey and realize that every moment and action has meaning beyond what they can see right now. The Ethiopian texts stress compassion, mindfulness, and responsibility. They remind people that life is not separate from others, and that spiritual awareness comes from paying attention to both ordinary and extraordinary events. So, death is now part of the same picture, a quiet echo of the care, guidance, and moral structure that makes life meaningful under the watchful eye of angels. This old way of looking at death is still useful today, when it is often hidden, rushed, or clinical. The journey of the soul is never truly solitary, even when imperceptible to others, as the same guardians who witnessed its growth, errors, and joys persist in their vigilance. The angel's presence makes the end of life dignified, caring, and orderly, turning death into a continuation of the sacred rhythms that have guided the living. Every change, whether it is celebrated, thought about, or done in silence, has the mark of these heavenly friends. They ease fear, honor memory, and keep a deep connection between human life and the universe that is always watching. Angels have always played a subtle yet important role in the quiet space between heaven and earth. They watch, record, and care for people, but they don't decide what happens to people. According to Ethiopian Scripture and the wisdom passed down through the ages, angels are never shown as judges who punish or reward people based on their own ideas of right and wrong. Instead, they are witnesses who keep the truth to themselves and watch life unfold without bias, recording actions, thoughts, and choices with unwavering attention. This difference is very important because it helps people understand how morality, accountability, and divine oversight are all connected. Life as a human is complicated, with many different intentions and times when things aren't clear. It is not always possible to break down actions into simple judgments, and people often don't know what their own motivations are. Angels see these subtleties clearly because they are always watching, but they don't make decisions or change the outcome by force. Their job is to hold a mirror of truth up to each life, write down what happens, and make sure that the order of the universe and the order of the earth stays the same. In this way, they are both witnesses to what people do and quiet supporters of how things naturally happen without interfering or forcing anything. From an Ethiopian point of view, only God can judge, and angels are the faithful recorders and protectors of truth. There will always be times in life when we make mistakes, have doubts, or make the wrong choice. But the angel's gaze does not judge. Instead, it is full of awareness, which keeps the moral and spiritual structure of the world consistent by keeping the essence of each action and choice. They don't hold anything back, but they don't change, punish, or raise. They keep a steady witness, a stable point of reference against which the flow of events can be measured and understood. This role of witness includes both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Angels see the small acts of kindness, the decisions made alone, and the thoughts that come and go quickly that other people don't notice. They are there at important times when people's lives cross paths with fate, as well as at quiet times when no one else is around to see. In many Ethiopian texts, angels are said to write down these events on heavenly scrolls, making a record of experience that never ends and keeps memory, context, and intent intact. Their unbiased observation guarantees that each life is respected, that no detail is overlooked, and that the overarching fabric of existence remains intact. People, on the other hand, often mix up seeing with judging. We assign blame, punish people, and make decisions based on how we feel and what we see. Angels, on the other hand, have an infinite amount of patience and perspective. They understand how cause and effect work without letting their own opinions get in the way. Their silence is not an absence, but a precise absence. They let life happen naturally by keeping records without interference, and they keep a base of truth that can help divine judgment or human reflection. They are responsible for keeping things in balance and clear, not for controlling or judging them. This dynamic also sheds light on how people think about their conscience and morals. The feeling of being watched, gently and consistently, affects choices without forcing them. Knowing that someone or something is always watching, remembering, and recording everything you do can subtly change how you act, make you think, and make you more aware. This awareness is not based on fear of punishment. Instead, it is based on being responsible and being aware that life is seen by beings whose purpose is to bring clarity, not condemnation. Angels serve as an indirect moral compass, influencing the essence of human experience through their silent vigilance rather than through direct enforcement. The difference between a witness and a judge is also important when there is a disagreement or a moral gray area. Angels do not help people figure out what is right and wrong when they are having trouble doing so. Instead, they stay quiet and watch, writing down choices, intentions, and consequences in a way that keeps the truth for later clarity. This helps people deal with moral problems, learn from their mistakes, and deal with the results of their choices in a natural way. The angel's lack of bias Make sure that the record is accurate and that each action is put in the context of the larger picture of life and spiritual rhythm. People may feel the presence of these angelic witnesses in their dreams, visions, and whispered thoughts, without being obvious. A sudden understanding, a quiet reassurance, or a gentle push to think can happen. These moments remind the soul that life is being watched, that nothing is lost to memory, and that the truth of existence is still there, even when people don't understand it. Angels, in their quiet watchfulness, provide continuity and perspective. They keep the record of life as a sacred trust that respects freedom, preserves integrity, and allows for real growth. The role of angels as witnesses means that truth will never die, even when there is a lot of injustice or moral collapse among people. People may not see the effects right away, and judgment may be put off or delayed, but the record in heaven lasts forever. Every deed, regardless of its magnitude, enriches the extensive record upheld by these entities, ensuring that history remains comprehensible and ethical patterns surface. Angels watch, record, and keep an eye on everything, including death, suffering, victory, and joy. They never judge, but they also never stop being responsible for witnessing. This point of view encourages people to have faith in both the honesty of their own actions and the patient watchfulness of the unseen. Angels do not witness to punish, but to protect. They make sure that life is remembered correctly, that choices are respected, and that the divine order has a clear record that can be used for judgment, understanding, and reflection later on. Their presence turns life into a story that is both lived and written down, where every moment, thought, and choice is part of a story that beings who are always there and whose care is quiet and constant keep safe. There has always been a fine line between knowing and being ready, between revealing and holding back throughout human history. In Ethiopian Scripture, especially in the stories of the angels, there is a common idea that some knowledge comes too soon and that some truths are kept from people until the right time. The Watcher's choice to teach people forbidden arts like stars, medicine, weapons, and enchantments shows that wisdom is not just about knowing things, but also about being able to use that knowledge responsibly. When given too soon, knowledge can overwhelm, distort, or disrupt the natural rhythms of both human life and the divine order. Angels, looking down from their high vantage point, knew that people weren't ready to handle all parts of the truth yet. They saw potential, curiosity, and ambition, but they also saw how fragile human understanding is, how impulsive people can be when they're excited, and how dangerous it is to have information that isn't backed up by experience. In these stories, keeping information from someone was not a punishment or something random. It was a way to protect them and make sure that they were ready for the truth. When people tried to understand wisdom too soon, they often ran into confusion, conflict, and unintended effects that lasted for generations. The stories show a deep understanding of how people are. Angels did not try to stop growth to keep control. They understood how complicated human minds and hearts are. Knowledge devoid of context or maturity may engender fear, misuse, and suffering. Like a seed needs soil, water, and sunlight to grow, the human soul needs preparation, understanding, and a sense of balance before it can handle deep truths. So, the angel's restraint is not refusal, but careful planning of timing to make sure that people get insights when they can fully integrate them without harm. This theme is very relevant to today's world. People today get information, at a rate that was never thought possible before. We are always getting new information, news, and discoveries, but we don't always understand them or get smarter. Like the early humans in the stories, we often learn things before we are ready to fully understand them, which can make us anxious, confused, or angry. The Watchers teach us that timing and understanding are linked, and that knowledge is valuable, not just for what you learn, but also for how you use it, who you are responsible for, and how you make decisions. Some truths can be dangerous if they aren't tempered, and some insights need time to shine through instead of being too much. The fear of knowing too much is a deep-seated part of being human. Even curiosity can make you anxious, and wanting to know something that isn't allowed or too soon can make you feel torn between wanting to know and being careful. In the stories about angels, this tension is shown as a kind of cosmic balance. The angels see potential, show what is safe, and step back when they need to. Their presence emphasizes the notion that knowledge is inherently neutral. It is the preparedness of the mind and heart that dictates its transformation into wisdom or chaos. So, timing is just as important as the knowledge itself. There are many examples of this theme in human history. When societies rush into discovery without being ready, they can end up in trouble. When civilizations use power or knowledge too soon, they can make both their own world and the world around them unstable. The Ethiopian stories put these lessons in a spiritual and cosmic context, making it clear that being afraid of knowing too much isn't just being hesitant, it's also being aware of the responsibilities that come with insight. Knowledge without discipline, clarity, and moral grounding can be harmful. On the other hand, patience lets wisdom grow in harmony with the natural rhythms of life. Angels, in their quiet watchfulness, also remind us that we need to be humble and not too curious. The story of the Watchers shows how both good and bad things can happen when people learn new things. They got powerful insights, but they weren't ready to deal with them, so bad things happened. This is also true in everyday life, where discoveries, scientific, social, or personal, can be exciting or scary, open up new possibilities, or lead to unexpected problems. The message is clear but not loud. Being ready is just as important as being ambitious. Thinking about things is just as important as wanting them. And timing is just as important as insight. These stories even make learning seem sacred and measured. Angels don't keep knowledge from people because they want to hurt them. They just know how time works, how character grows, and how understanding works. This way, people are encouraged to develop patience, thoughtfulness, and the ability to tell the difference. We should value curiosity, but not let it get out of hand. We should seek insight, but with respect for how heavy it is. The fear of knowing too much isn't a warning against learning. It's a gentle reminder to be mindful, humble, and aware of the consequences of what you learn. People may feel this tension in the quiet moments of life when they are able to think clearly, the pull of curiosity against the wisdom of restraint. Dreams, fleeting memories, or sudden moments of clarity often resonate with this cosmic equilibrium, reminding the soul that insight is most potent when coupled with preparation, awareness, and intention. Angels, who are invisible protectors, keep the balance by watching and waiting. They help people learn things that will help them instead of hurt them, and that will make things clearer instead of more confusing. From this point of view, the fear of knowing too much becomes a lesson, a way of life that is like the natural cycles that the angels keep. It is not denial, punishment, or limitation, but an invitation to grow up with the knowledge you want, to match your curiosity with your readiness, and to be both eager and careful when you learn something new. Every discovery, every insight, and every sudden flash of understanding is part of a carefully planned journey. Beings with patience that goes beyond human timelines are watching over it to make sure that truth comes out when the heart and mind are ready to take it all in. The Church has always been a unique guardian in the highlands of Ethiopia, far from the busy cities and the noise of human ambition. It has protected not only faith, but also knowledge, history, and the subtle truths that many people have forgotten. Ancient monasteries, carved into cliffs and hidden in remote valleys, became safe places for scrolls and manuscripts where the sacred could be kept safe, quietly, and with devotion that lasted for generations. The monks who lived in these places had lives that were full of prayer, study, and careful copying of texts. They knew that every gesture and movement was important because they were the keepers of stories that held the memories of angels, people, and the order of the universe itself. The manuscripts were fragile, but lasted a long time. The Geas writing on them held not only words, but also the weight of centuries. Carefully written stories about the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the unseen companions of humans have been kept alive as a quiet protest against time, neglect, and the changing priorities of the world. These texts preserved angels in ways that other traditions let fade. They carefully recorded their names, roles, and advice, but with the softness of someone who knows how sacred a whisper is. Through its quiet, hard work, the Ethiopian Church became the link between ancient revelations and future generations, keeping the flow of knowledge that had been lost or silenced in other places. Caves and isolated monastic cells evolved into sanctuaries of memory. The air in these places smelled faintly of earth, smoke, and ink, and there was a sense of calm that seemed to slow down time. The monks worked in silence, their oil lamps casting a soft glow on their work. They knew that every line they copied and every scroll they preserved was a sign of their devotion to God and the unseen world. People held knowledge of angels, their roles, and how they watched over humanity in high regard. It was not just theology, but also living history, a thread that connected the divine to everyday life. Because of their dedication, generations of Ethiopians were able to pass down stories that not only showed faith, but also understanding. These stories whispered about guardianship, cosmic balance, and the gentle care of the unseen. The Church's job was both to protect and to be intentional. During a time when other communities threw away texts they thought were unimportant or heretical, the Ethiopian monasteries kept them safe because they knew how important these stories were. Angels watched people quietly and saw their stories reflected in these efforts. Just as the angels witnessed without judging, the monks preserved without getting in the way, keeping the knowledge safe for those who were ready to receive it. Preservation was an extension of angelic care, with human hands echoing the divine attention that had watched over life since the beginning. Being alone was an important part of this guardianship. Monasteries that were hidden in the mountains or behind thick forests protected texts from being destroyed by natural decay, foreign invasions, or religious upheavals. Monks lived simple, disciplined lives and liked being alone and quiet so they could stay focused on their work. Every time I copied a manuscript, I was meditating. Every hour I spent in candlelight was a prayer, and every careful stroke of ink was a promise that the stories of angels and the divine order would not be forgotten. In these places, time seemed to slow down. letting the preservation of memory happen without rushing, as if the rhythm of heaven had seeped into the daily lives of the monks. The Ethiopian Church also knew how important it was to be accessible, but only to a certain extent. Manuscripts were well protected, but they weren't completely hidden from the faithful. During communal prayer, select texts were read aloud, and students shared what they had learned orally, which kept the knowledge of angels and divine order alive in the community. But this sharing was always intentional, careful, and limited, showing that the people who shared it understood that knowledge was important and should only be shared when people were ready to understand it. In this way, the church acted as a steward, balancing, keeping things safe with passing them on, keeping things secret with revealing them, and following the angelic principles of witness and guidance without interfering. Keeping these texts alive also made a cultural memory that went beyond the spiritual. The tales of the Watchers, the Nephilim, and angels watching over people became a part of Ethiopia's culture, influencing art, music, rituals, and everyday thoughts. Everyone who heard these teachings knew that there were always unseen forces walking with people, and that life was both watched and guided. The Ethiopian Church, in its careful protection, made sure that this understanding would last and quietly shape people's thoughts, actions, and beliefs for hundreds of years. The monks' quiet work still has an effect today, even as manuscripts are digitized and studied. Scholars, students, and believers who read these texts now treat them with the same care and respect that kept fragile scrolls safe. The stories of angels and divine oversight, which were once only known to a few people in caves, are now known to everyone. They still have the same gentle rhythm, the hush of devotion, and the contemplative tone that they had when they were first written down. Every line copied and every story remembered shows that care has been continuous, honoring both human effort and angelic observation. It reminds us that some truths should be held gently, not shouted, and shared with patience, respect, and presence. Names have always meant more than just labels. They have also meant sound and resonance. When it comes to angels, especially in Ethiopian Scripture, names aren't random. They have meaning, symbolism, and the subtle vibration of intention. Each name shows what the being is like, what job it has, and how it interacts with the world. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael are not just names. They are a symphony of qualities, a code that tells you what they are, what they do, and how they fit into the universe. The sound of a name has meaning, and when it is spoken, it brings to mind the traits of the person who has it, changing how people see and experience things in ways that go beyond what is normal. The origins of angelic names often give clues about what they do and how they relate to people and God. Michael means, "who is like God," reflects not only power, but also alignment with divine authority and protection. Gabriel, "God is my strength," has the sound of communication, revelation, and the slow revealing of truth. Raphael, "God heals," stands for healing, care, and the hard work of fixing wounds that aren't visible. These names are symbolic, but their symbolism is felt as much as it is understood. They vibrate with meaning, changing the mood around the person, the people they interact with, and the memory they leave on the soul. In Ethiopian tradition, where the canonical texts keep these stories so well, the names of angels are often seen as a kind of holy language. Pronunciation is important because the way syllables are pronounced connects the earthly ear to the heavenly sound. Long ago, scholars, monks, and scribes knew that every name had many meanings. Writing, chanting, or thinking about these names was a way to meditate and recognize the order of the universe. When spoken or even thought about quietly, the sound connects human consciousness to the rhythm and intention of heavenly beings. By bridging the gap between heaven and earth, the meanings of angelic names go beyond the individual to the whole world. A lot of names have parts that have to do with moral qualities, celestial events, or natural forces. They remind us that the angel's work is connected to both people and the universe as a whole. The letters, the vibrations, and the rhythm of each name are like a soft signature of the universe, bringing the unseen order and the real world into harmony. Thinking about a name lets you see the structure and purpose behind divine oversight, the duties that each being has, and the unseen structure that supports both creation and human experience. The different names and the different ways they are written also have meaning. Some angels have more than one name, and each one shows a different part of their work or influence. One name may mean safety, another may mean guidance, and a third may mean healing. This variety shows that angelic influence is layered, complicated, and changes depending on the situation. People are made up of many different parts, and so are the beings who watch over life as it happens. Their names are carefully chosen to fit these parts. The Ethiopian texts show how rich these names are, and the fact that they are preserved in Ge'ez gives them subtle phonetic cues that reinforce the symbolic nature of their duties. This reminds the reader or listener that meaning is woven into the very sound of the world. Sound is not neutral. Even when not spoken, the vibration of a name affects how we think, feel, and see things. When you think about a name in silence or prayer, it can bring out the essence of that name, which connects the human mind with angelic qualities. The resonance is soft but constant, like the faint sound of a bell ringing in a distant valley. You can barely hear it, but it changes the space around it. Angels are aware of this resonance because they are observers and guides. They know that the ability of humans to hear, remember, and respond to the subtle vibrations of truth is a link between knowledge and experience. The names have both identity and function. They are a mix of sound and meaning that keeps the universe whole, while also inviting people to join in. Ethiopian manuscripts often show how important it is to pay close attention to naming by showing how letters, rhythm, and intention work together. Scribes wrote names down carefully, knowing that a wrong stroke or pronunciation could change the sound they were trying to make. This level of care shows a deep respect for the many meanings that each name has, as well as an understanding that these words are not just informational, but also full of vibrational meaning. When you read, think about, or keep these names, you are quietly tuning in to the order of angels in a way that is both subtle and deep. People may hear the echo of these names even when they are alone and thinking or praying silently. They may not be able to fully explain why they are important. The subtle vibrations, layered meanings, and symbolic weight come together to make a bridge between perception and reality. They gently invite us to tune into the unseen, while keeping our experiences rooted in the real world. In this way, studying and remembering angelic names is both a way to think and a way to be involved. People connect with the sacred through sound, symbols, and intention, while angels stay alert, recognizing and strengthening the connection between divine oversight and human receptivity. The names become more than just names when they have these layers of meaning. They are maps, guides, and keys. Each one invites people to explore, think about, and connect with them. They encourage people to see the qualities that the angels have, and to reflect those qualities in their own lives. In Ethiopian Scripture, this practice is preserved not as an esoteric exercise, but as a lived interaction with the sacred, a quiet acknowledgement that every name carries intention, every sound carries meaning, and every reflection opens a door to understanding the invisible order that surrounds human existence. Angels have always been shown in Ethiopian Scripture as keepers of balance, not rulers. They are subtle guides who make sure that the threads of existence stay together without breaking. Their job is not to control, tell people what to do, or be in charge, but to watch, quietly influence, and keep the peace between heaven and earth. Every little thing that happens in the world, like a change in the wind or the stars, or even a change in the human heart, is noticed, but never pushed. This gentle presence keeps the balance of creation while letting life unfold in its own way, which includes human freedom, choice, and the complex results of decisions made with both understanding and error. These stories say that angels value free will above all else. They might whisper, light the way, or give strength in quiet ways, but they never force anyone to do anything. Their interventions are gentle and meant to nudge rather than force, and they are meant to guide without taking away people's freedom of action. The stories make it clear that being in charge is not the same as being balanced. A tree swaying in the wind, a river winding through the valley, or a human soul wrestling with a choice. All of these things are free to act, move, and change with the angel's quiet presence, making sure that no disturbance becomes a disaster. It is a kind of stewardship that puts observation above control, patience above orders, and timing above urgency. This balance is reflected in human experience in many ways. Everyone has to deal with the conflict between wanting to help and knowing that it's best to let things happen on their own. Angels represent the idea that the best way to keep order in life is to have both freedom and responsibility. Angels give people guidance, clarity, and protection that they can't see, just like a gardener doesn't force a tree to grow in a certain way, but gives it support, water, and sunlight. Every decision, every mistake, every brave or hesitant moment becomes part of the cosmic balance, changing both the person and the world around them. The Ethiopian texts often talk about how angels watch without judging. They see people fight, win, and lose, and they write down these events with care and understanding. Their role is not to punish. It is to involve people in a way that respects the complexity of free will. When people mess up, the angels are still there, quietly and steadily, giving subtle corrections or support that don't change the natural order of cause and effect. This careful balance between guidance and independence creates a lot of tension in the stories. It shows that true balance can't exist where freedom is taken away, and that harmony isn't maintained by forcing people to do things, but by being there for them. In this way of thinking, angels are very aware of timing. They know that things happening in the world, in nature, and in the sky can't be rushed. Interventions happen when they matter most, not when they are easy. This awareness is like the patience that life itself often requires. It reminds people that even though they can get help, growth, learning, and understanding, all take their own time. Angels keep the balance, which is always changing to fit the flow of creation, the choices people make, and the small changes that happen in both heaven and earth. The idea of free will also stresses being responsible. Angels know everything that will happen when they do something, but people don't. The stories imply that the act of making choices, even if they are wrong, is an important part of creation. Angels keep things from getting too crazy by being there, but they don't make decisions for people. In this way, balance is not maintained through control, but through careful accompaniment and the silent vigilance of entities that comprehend both the vulnerability and the possibilities of human freedom. Angels are also shown as people who bring together opposites. When people want too much, get angry, or are afraid, angels are like a soft current of balance that stops too much without taking away choice. When people are kind, brave, or wise, the angel's presence confirms and strengthens those qualities, but it never replaces them. Their role is always relational, a quiet partnership that respects independence while promoting stability. This is a balance that goes beyond the physical and into the emotional and spiritual parts of life. It is a constant, unseen framework that keeps the chaos and beauty of life in delicate harmony. The balance is even present in the natural world. Angels watch over the wind, fire, water, and earth. But these things can move freely within their limits, following their own rules, while being gently guided by something that isn't seen. The Ethiopian Scriptures talk about how these forces affect people and the world around them, but the angels never force anything to happen. This dual focus on the human heart and the larger universe shows how careful angels are in their roles, not by control, but by being aware, responsive, and respectful of everyone's freedom. At all levels, balance is kept. The stories basically tell us that life is always changing and moving. Angels keep it safe by being there quietly and with subtlety, patience, and empathy. They show that you don't have to use force to have an effect, that you don't have to use coercion to give advice, and that freedom is most meaningful when it comes with careful attention. This cosmic balance between heaven and earth is always changing, fragile, and in motion. It shows how all of creation depends on each other. Every choice we make, every movement of the stars, and every whisper of the wind adds to this harmony. It shows how freedom, guidance, and responsibility work together. Even when people are quiet and thinking, the end of time has a certain weight in their minds. It is a time when the layers of existence, the seen and the unseen, seem to come together in clarity and resolution. In Ethiopian Scripture, angels are not there to bring fear or chaos. Instead, they are there to keep order and maintain the balance and rhythm of creation until the end. Their presence is calm, purposeful, and unchanging, a steadying force that makes sure that every action, every event, and every soul's journey fits with the cosmic plan, even as the world itself gets ready for change. The texts talk about the heavens moving, but not in a fiery way. Instead, they unfold slowly, like a dawn that slowly brightens the landscape and shows the patterns that have always been there. Angels move through these patterns with calm attention, watching the end of hundreds of years of choices, growth, and interaction. They don't feel anxious or rushed because they see time differently than we do. Angels see the last moments as a continuous flow of events, with each decision and its effects fitting into the bigger picture. Mortals may feel them as sudden or uncertain. At the end of time, angels are said to be both witnesses and helpers. They watch, record, and guide, making sure that justice, mercy, and truth are upheld without taking away the freedom of the people they are with. Their work is still subtle, focusing on alignment rather than intervention, even as the last cycles draw near. When people realize that something is coming to an end, they often feel anxious, scared, or awed. But the angels are always there, calm, steady, and unchanging, which shows the ultimate order that goes beyond human emotion. In their quiet watchfulness, they show that the end is not a break, but a natural end to everything that has come before it. A time when all of creation's complex threads come together without violence or confusion. The images that come to mind when people think about the end of the world are often very vivid, but in Ethiopian texts, they are more peaceful. Angels are shown flying through the skies and over the land, their bodies glowing and soft, paying attention to every detail of life with care and precision. The stars, rivers, and winds keep moving, as if the universe is breathing in a slow, steady rhythm. The same care that goes into watching people's lives also goes into the unfolding of the group's fate, making sure that every decision and every turning point happens in harmony. Angels don't punish people. They conduct an unseen symphony, making sure that the last movements fit together so that the end of time feels natural, even unavoidable, instead of violent or sudden. People's ideas about the end are shaped by their hopes and imaginations. Many people think of disaster, chaos, or judgment, but the Ethiopian view stresses understanding and order. Angels help people through changes by helping them be aware of and accept them. Careful planning, not noise or control, writes the last chapters of history. Angels are a reminder that even when things happen that we can't understand, they happen on purpose. Just like angels have always watched life unfold with calm attention. During these times, angels are closely linked to the moral and spiritual patterns that have been formed over hundreds of years. They don't judge people like people do. Instead, they keep records, make sure things are clear, and make sure that actions have consequences that match them. The texts often stress how fair they are, saying that their job is to witness, guide, and keep things in balance. These quiet, watchful beings are always there, even during the biggest changes to land, sky, or soul, to make sure that what happens follows the rules of balance and truth that have guided creation from the start. Ethiopian scriptures also say that the end of time is a time to think, make amends, and start over. Angels help with this by making people more aware, not by forcing things to happen. People and groups have moments of clarity, insight, and understanding, thanks to the divine companions who have been there for every step of life. This advice is never pushy. It respects freedom while gently showing the links between choices and consequences, actions and results. The angel's role stays the same as it has always been: to carefully protect creation, respect freedom, keep peace, and keep creation's integrity until the end of time. The natural world is also part of this end, and it is guided by the same quiet attention. Angels watch over everything, making sure that stars stay on their paths, winds change in predictable ways, and waters flow without any problems. This last part has a rhythm to it, and it makes sense because it shows the lasting balance between heaven and earth. People may feel awe, doubt, or even wonder, but the angel's presence makes sure that everything happens in a calm, controlled, and measured way. Their attention to detail is like the care they have shown throughout history, showing that endings, like beginnings, are made with patience, precision, and purpose. From this point of view, the end of time is not something to be afraid of. It is proof of continuity. Angels turn the end of history into a moment of understanding, where the patterns of life are honored, decisions are witnessed, and the cosmos moves with quiet certainty. Humanity's ultimate understanding of the celestial and temporal order is directed by entities that have perpetually upheld equilibrium, respected free will, and preserved harmony. Even the threshold of conclusion becomes a peaceful, reflective, and subtle space of revelation when they are there, showing the deep and lasting connection between the human and the divine. These old stories still teach us things that are surprisingly relevant, even after hundreds of years. In the midst of modern life, which is always moving, buzzing with technology, and full of distractions, the quiet presence of angels shows us how we have lost touch with silence, reflection, and gentle guidance. In today's world, it's easy to keep going without stopping, with our minds racing in a million different directions. But the stories in Ethiopian Scripture remind us that even the smallest acts of kindness, the softest whispers of intuition, and the quiet attention we give or receive can help us fit in with the rhythms of a bigger, hidden order. The angels in these stories were never meant to be in charge or control. They were there to keep things in balance, watch over people, and give them gentle advice. This role has a new meaning in modern life. The constant flow of information, the need to act quickly, and the fact that we often ignore the quiet voice inside us can all make it hard to see things clearly. The old stories say that even now, if we pay attention to the quiet, the unnoticed, or the gentle, we might be able to connect with the same currents of order and intention that angels have always protected. They are still important, but not because they show off their power in big ways. Instead, they keep harmony, patience, and understanding over time in small, often unseen ways. Even though modern humans are very good with technology, they still have times when things are out of control and out of balance, just like early humans did. Emotional upheaval, moral ambiguity, and social disarray resemble the trials depicted in ancient tales. However, contemporary responses are more nuanced and introspective. The stories of angels teach us that guidance is not about making people change. It is about listening, watching, and doing things that fit with a bigger goal. Even when life seems broken or too much to handle, knowing that there are unseen forces at work and that you can connect with them can be comforting. It can remind you that balance is possible, and that wisdom can come from being patient and thinking things through. The Ethiopian texts stress how important it is to pay attention to things you can't see. Angels are shown paying attention to the smallest things, watching what people do, and making sure that the delicate structures of life stay in place. Today, this can mean being aware of what you're doing, living with purpose, and being aware of both the natural and human worlds. Even though modern distractions are strong, they don't have to make us unaware. Every time we think about something or sit still, we connect with the lasting framework that these heavenly beings have always protected. It is not a call to fear or judgment, but to gentle attunement, a quiet partnership with the rhythm of life that we can't see. Angels' subtle role in guiding without interference is especially helpful for modern life. In a world where many people want to control things or change the outcome, the stories suggest a different way. To think about what you do, see what happens, and be patient. People today often think of success as getting quick results or seeing visible progress, but the stories show that the best advice comes in ways that are almost invisible but have a big impact. Being open to this kind of guidance, whether it's through kindness, restraint, or insight, helps us understand cause and effect and how we fit into a bigger picture that goes beyond ourselves. These stories also remind us how important it is to be quiet and think. In the past, mountains, deserts, and other quiet places were places where people could feel the presence of angels and get in sync with the rhythm of the divine. Today, silence is less common, but just as important. Quiet times, whether in nature, during meditation, or just when you're paying attention to everyday life, give you a chance to feel the unseen, see patterns, and make choices with a deeper level of awareness. Angels, in their gentle vigilance, show that being aware is not a luxury, but a basic part of a balanced life that can be developed even in the midst of modern noise. The lessons also apply to relationships. Angels saw, wrote down, and gently guided without being in charge. In human interactions, a similar approach, listening carefully, watching without judging, and helping without forcing, shows the same ideas of balance and harmony. In modern life, we often put immediacy, control, or persuasion first. But the stories remind us that the best way to influence others is to be subtle, patient, and in line with how things are going. By embodying this approach, people can be like angels and keep the delicate balance between freedom, responsibility, and connection. Technology can be overwhelming or distracting, but it can also be a way to connect with others instead of breaking up. Like angels who carefully keep the rhythms of nature and human life, people can learn to manage their digital interactions with purpose, making room for quiet connection, observation, and reflection. The same ideas of balance and being present that guided angelic oversight in the past can help people today deal with the demands of work, social life, and personal growth. By applying the awareness developed through these narratives to everyday life, the invisible order that angels have consistently maintained may become evident in modern patterns. In the end, the old stories ask for a kind of attention that goes beyond time. They tell us to take our time, look around, and think about the world around us, which helps us become more aware of the small things that affect our lives. Angels are still important today, not as far off or abstract figures, but as reminders that we can interact with both people and nature in a calm, purposeful, and harmonious way. Their example shows that guidance is often quiet, influence is soft, and balance is not kept by force, but by care, attention, and respect for the free will of others. This lesson is just as important now as it was in the past, when life was full of distractions and movement. As the story comes to an end, it gently asks us to stop and enjoy the quiet times that have always been there, even when life is busy. The angels who have been with us through every chapter of this journey don't go away when the last words are spoken. They stay, unseen but felt, guiding breath and thought towards stillness, and serving as a gentle reminder that the rhythms of care, balance, and attentiveness go on even after stories end. This is not a time to stop suddenly or be alarmed. Instead, it's a chance to get to a place of rest, where the mind can let go of the fast pace of modern life, and the heart can feel the calm steadiness that these old stories have always promised. In the stillness, one starts to realize that the angels' work was never about show. They didn't yell or use force to get their way. They have been there, quietly watching, guiding, and keeping things in order. When the listener exhales, they realize that a lot of the stress in life comes from fighting against the natural flow and expecting noise when there should be silence. The stories make you want to go back to a softer awareness, to realize that the quiet, the subtle, and the unseen often hold the best advice and comfort. Angels exemplify this principle illustrating that rest and contemplation constitute forms of alignment with a higher order. People today are used to being busy all the time, so they may not like this stillness at first. It is hard to focus on anything because of all the distractions, obligations, and constant flow of information. But if you can let your mind wander, you can see a different rhythm, one where observation doesn't require action, where being there is important, and where silence isn't empty, but a friend to thought. In this context, angels transcend mythological representations. They embody the innate quiet awareness that humanity has perpetually possessed, revealed during instances of contemplation, reverence, and stillness. They remind us that even in a world that never really stops, there are times when listening is the best way to be involved. The story's journey through ancient Ethiopia, through the texts and teachings that have been passed down over the years, has not just been about history or myths. It has been a way to get in tune with the listener and teach them how to live in the moment. Every whisper of guidance, every silent observation, and every gentle intervention by angels shows us how to live with care and attention. The story itself unfolds in a way that is similar to how angels work, slowly, carefully, and with infinite patience. When the story is over, the listener doesn't feel scared or rushed. Instead, they feel like they are part of a larger, unseen harmony. The angels have been a part of the story from the beginning, weaving together choices, actions, and outcomes into a single story. Even though things seem to happen in an unpredictable way, the main theme has been one of balance, respect for free will, and keeping the cosmic order. The listener's mind starts to pick up on the soft rhythm of these lessons. They may now realize that calm is not a place to go, but a process that requires observation, patience, and subtle guidance. In these last moments, the angel's job is less to intervene and more to affirm that life, in all its complexity and fragility, is always held quietly, with unwavering care. The image of angels moving quietly through stars, waters, winds, and human hearts is still a comforting way to think of the unseen guardians that are always with us. These stories tell us to pay attention to the small, quiet, and persistent patterns that shape our daily lives. A look, a pause, or a deep breath can all be ways for ancient wisdom to flow into modern life. The listener is encouraged to practice this awareness, to develop subtle focus and gentle presence, and to recognize that even as endings draw near, the inherent rhythms of care and support persist, unimpeded and voluntary. The focus stays on peace instead of ending, even as the story comes to an end. Angels have been witnesses, protectors, and helpers throughout history, and now they are friends who help us be quiet. The end of the story doesn't break anything. Instead, it gently folds time back into the listener's own rhythm. The mind may drift, memories may come to the surface, and thoughts may wander, but all of this happens in a gentle way, guided by the steady, patient energy that has run through the story. This last thought is a reminder that endings don't come out of nowhere or shock us. They are just the natural progression of what has always been there, seen by beings who care for us all the time and don't get in our way. As the listener gets more and more quiet, the lessons of balance, observation, and patience turn into a feeling of trust. You don't need to act right away or fully understand. The angel's presence, whether real or imagined, is a soft reminder that life goes on, choices matter, and there is always a quiet, watchful order supporting each moment. This understanding, which is taken in slowly, lets you rest, think, and reconnect with the stillness that is so often lost in the fast pace of modern life. It invites you to live in a place where the unseen and the everyday come together, where thinking is just as important as doing, and where being calm is just as important as moving. In these last moments, the listener may feel like they are coming home not to a physical place, but to a feeling of being with others and supported. The story, which has traveled through time, culture, and imagination, now gently lets go of its threads in the mind and heart. Angels are still there, not as far-off beings to scare or awe, but as friends in the quiet spaces between thoughts, breaths, and moments of being present. Their example shows that peace can be found not through control or noise, but through focus, alignment, and gentle observation. The story ends on a soft note that makes you want to stay, think, and feel the healing power of calm. The night, which is already deep, seems to soak up the echoes of the story, putting each lesson into the quiet. Angels are still watching over the world, and the listener can relax in the knowledge that they are. They are now in tune with the quiet rhythms of care and balance. There is no rush, no stress, only the slow unfolding of understanding, the gentle alignment of heart and mind, and the calm realization that the threads of history, life, and guidance have all come together in this moment of peace. In this space, you can finally breathe out, let go, and just be. You will be surrounded by the calm, unchanging order that has always been there and will always be there, quietly and forever.